This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. As she gave me a quick tour, I noticed how run down everything looked. Peeling paint, flickering lights, an overall sense of neglect. When we reached the patient wing, a chill ran down my spine. The long, dimly lit hallway stretched out before me, lined with heavy metal doors. Muffled sounds came from behind some of them, mumbling, soft crying, occasional outbursts. "You'll be responsible for hourly checks on the patients in this wing," the administrator explained. "Most are heavily medicated and sleep through the night, but a few can be restless. Just stick to the routine and you'll be fine." She introduced me to the other night nurse, an older woman named Gladys, before heading out. Gladys barely looked up from her magazine as she grunted a hello. Great, I thought. Looks like I'm on my own tonight. The first few hours passed uneventfully as I made my rounds, checking on sleeping patients and updating charts. Around 2 a.m., I was at the nurse's station when I heard shuffling footsteps approaching. I looked up to see an elderly man in a bathrobe standing there, his white hair wild and unkempt. "Can I help you, sir?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. He leaned in close, his rheumy eyes wide. "They're coming," he whispered urgently. "I can hear them in the walls. We have to get out of here." I recognized him as Mr. Thompson from my patient files, late-stage dementia, prone to delusions. "It's all right, Mr. Thompson," I said soothingly. "You're safe here. Let's get you back to bed." But he grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "No, you don't understand. They're in the basement. I've seen them, heard them. We're all in danger." A chill ran through me at his words. I gently pried his fingers from my arm. "How about we take a little walk? Clear your head a bit?" He nodded frantically. Yes, but we must be quiet. They'll hear us." I led him down the hall, planning to circle back to his room. But as we passed a door marked "Basement Access," he stopped abruptly. "Listen," he hissed. "Can't you hear them?" I paused, humoring him, and that's when I heard it, a faint whisper, almost below the threshold of hearing. I shook my head, telling myself it was just pipes or the wind, but Mr. Thompson's eyes were wild with fear. "They're awake," he moaned. "God help us all." Before I could stop him, he wrenched open the basement door and hurried down the stairs. Cursing under my breath, I followed him. The temperature seemed to drop with each step into the gloom. At the bottom, I fumbled for a light switch. A single bare bulb flickered to life, casting deep shadows across the cluttered space. Old furniture and boxes were piled haphazardly. The musty smell of damp and decay filled my nostrils. "Mr. Thompson?" I called softly. "Where are you?" A scuffling sound came from behind a tall wardrobe. I cautiously made my way over, my heart pounding. "Come on out now. It's time to go back upstairs." I peered around the edge of the wardrobe. Mr. Thompson was crouched in the corner, rocking back and forth. But it wasn't him that made my blood run cold. In the shadows beyond him, I saw something. A dark figure, blacker than the surrounding gloom. As my eyes struggled to focus on it, it seemed to shift and writhe, as if not fully solid. I blinked hard, sure I was seeing things. When I looked again, it was gone. But the sensation of a malevolent presence lingered. Mr. Thompson looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. "You saw it, didn't you?" he whispered. "Now you know. They're coming for us all." I helped him to his feet, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Let's go back upstairs now," I managed to say. As we climbed the stairs, that faint whispering seemed to follow us. I resisted the urge to look back, focusing instead on getting us out of there as quickly as possible. Once we were back in the patient wing, I got Mr. Thompson settled in his room. But even after I closed his door, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The rest of my shift passed in a haze of anxiety. Every shadow, every odd noise set my nerves on edge. When morning finally came, I practically ran out of that place. I called the administrator as soon as I got home and quit on the spot. She seemed unsurprised, even resigned, as if she'd been expecting it. I still don't know what I saw that night. I've tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, fueled by an old man's paranoid ramblings. But in my darkest moments, I remember that shadowy figure. And sometimes, when the house is quiet, I swear I can still hear those whispers. I pulled up to the address and grabbed the pasta order from my insulated bag. As I walked up to the front door, I noticed the porch light was off, which was a bit odd. I rang the doorbell, and a man answered pretty quickly. He looked to be in his mid-30s, average height and build. Nothing really stood out about him. "Hi there, delivery for Mark?" I said, glancing down at the receipt. "That's me," he replied with a slight smile. I handed over the food, and he passed me a cash tip. As I turned to leave, I felt his eyes on me. It was an uncomfortable sensation, like he was staring a bit too intently. I shrugged it off and headed back to my car. People can be weird sometimes, I figured. A couple days later, I got a notification that someone had followed me on Instagram. I didn't recognize the username, but when I checked the profile, my stomach dropped. It was a photo of that same guy from the delivery. His bio said Mark and listed his location as Portland. How the hell did he find me? My Instagram isn't connected to my work at all. I quickly blocked the account, feeling unsettled. Later that night, I got a Facebook friend request from a Mark Johnson. Same guy, different platform. I denied it and blocked him there too. Now I was seriously creeped out. This guy was clearly searching for me online. The next day, my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn connection request. Yep, you guessed it, Mark again. At this point, I was seriously freaked out. I called my brother Tom in a panic. "Dude, this is not normal," Tom said after I explained the situation. "Have you gotten any messages from him?" Just then, my phone dinged. A DM request on Twitter. With shaking hands, I opened it. "Jake, I've been thinking about you since you delivered my food. I'd love to get to know you better. Maybe we could grab a coffee sometime." I felt sick to my stomach. "Tom, he just messaged me on Twitter. He wants to meet up." "Hell no," Tom replied firmly. "Block him everywhere. If he contacts you again, we're going to the police." I spent the next hour locking down all my social media accounts and changing my privacy settings. But the damage was already done. This guy knew way too much about me. The next few days were tense. I jumped every time my phone buzzed. I kept looking over my shoulder during my delivery shifts, half expecting to see Mark's face staring back at me. On Friday night, I was out doing deliveries when I noticed a car that seemed to be following me. It was hard to tell in the dark, but it looked like it had been behind me for the last few turns. My heart started racing. Was it just paranoia, or was Mark actually tailing me now? I took a series of random turns to see if the car would keep following. Sure enough, it stayed right behind me. Now I was in full-blown panic mode. I called Tom. "I think he's following me in his car," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do I do?" "Where are you?" Tom asked, his voice tense. "I'm coming to meet you right now." I gave him my location, and Tom said he'd be there in 10 minutes. Those were the longest 10 minutes of my life. I kept driving aimlessly, watching the headlights behind me. Finally, I saw Tom's truck pull up beside me at a red light. "Pull over," he mouthed, gesturing to a nearby parking lot. I nodded and pulled in, Tom right behind me. The car that had been following me drove past slowly. In the glow of the streetlights, I caught a glimpse of the driver. It was definitely Mark. Tom came over to my car, his face grim. "Was that him?" I nodded, still shaken. "Yeah, that was definitely the guy." "All right, that's it," Tom said firmly. "You're done with deliveries for tonight. I'm coming with you on your shifts from now on until we get this sorted out." For the next week, Tom rode shotgun during all my delivery runs. It was comforting having him there, but I still felt on edge. Every time we passed a car that looked like Mark's, my heart would race. Then came the night that everything came to a head. We had just finished a delivery and stopped at a gas station to fill up. As I was pumping gas, I glanced across the lot and froze. There was Mark, filling up his own car and staring right at me. "Tom," I hissed urgently. "He's here." Tom's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Mark. "That's him? I'm going to go talk to this creep." I grabbed Tom's arm. "No, don't. Let's just go to the police station. We need to file a report." Tom looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. We got in the car and drove straight to the nearest precinct. My hands were shaking as I recounted the whole story to the officer at the desk. She took detailed notes and assured us they would investigate. "In the meantime," she said, "document everything. Save screenshots of any messages. If you see him following you again, don't confront him. Call 911 immediately." We left the station feeling a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. At least there was an official record now. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. For the next few weeks, I was constantly on high alert. Tom kept riding with me on deliveries. We didn't see Mark again, but I still felt like I was being watched. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. No more social media requests, no more sightings. Mark seemed to have vanished into thin air. It's been a few months now, and there's been no sign of him. But I'm still looking over my shoulder. I'm much more cautious about my online presence, and I'm hyper-aware of my surroundings during deliveries. This whole experience has been a stark reminder of how vulnerable we can be, even doing something as mundane as delivering food. I'm grateful it didn't escalate further, but the fear and stress of those weeks have left their mark. I don't think I'll ever feel quite as carefree on the job again. Sometimes I wonder what made Mark fixate on me. Was it just random, or was there something specific that caught his attention? I'll probably never know, and honestly, I don't want to. I'm just glad it's over, and I hope I never see or hear from Mark again. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's to trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. And don't be afraid to ask for help or go to the authorities. This could have gotten so much worse if I hadn't reached out to Tom and the police. To anyone else out there in the service industry, especially delivery drivers, stay safe. You never know who's on the other side of that door. And to anyone who's experienced something similar, know that you're not alone. It's a terrifying thing to go through, but there is support out there. As for me, I'm still delivering food for now, but I'm looking into other job options. Something where I don't have to worry about obsessive customers tracking me down. This experience has definitely changed me, but I'm trying not to let it control my life. One day at a time, right? It was a Tuesday night around 10:30 p.m. I had just picked up an order from this burrito place downtown, 2 steak burritos and some chips. The delivery address was for one of those fancy gated communities on the outskirts of town. I've delivered there a bunch of times before, so I didn't think much of it. As I pulled up to the gate, I punched in the code the customer had given me. The gate slowly creaked open, and I drove in. It was eerily quiet. Most of the houses were dark, and there was hardly anyone around. I remember thinking it felt kind of creepy, but I brushed it off. I've done plenty of late-night deliveries before. I was about halfway to the customer's house when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. A black sedan was tailing me pretty closely. At first I figured it was just another resident coming home late, but something about it made me uneasy. The way they were following so close behind me, matching my every turn. My gut told me something was off. I tried to shake the feeling as I pulled up to the customer's house. I grabbed the food bag and got out, locking my car behind me. As I walked up to the front door, I heard car doors slamming shut. I glanced back and saw two men getting out of the black sedan, which had parked right behind my car. My heart started racing. Everything in me was screaming that this wasn't right. I quickly rang the doorbell, praying the customer would answer fast. But after a few seconds of silence, I realized no one was coming. I turned around, and the two men were walking towards me. One was wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up, while the other had on a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. They both looked to be in their 30s or 40s. "Hey, man," the guy in the hoodie called out. "We're a little lost. Think you could give us a ride to the main road?" I clutched the food bag tightly, my palms sweating. "Sorry, I can't," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just here to drop off a delivery." The guy in the cap spoke up. "Come on, it'll only take a minute. We just need to get out of here." I shook my head. "I really can't. Sorry. I have other deliveries to make." I started walking back to my car, my legs feeling like jelly. But as I approached, I realized with horror that the black sedan was parked so close behind me that I couldn't open my driver's side door. The two men were right on my heels now. "Listen," the hooded one said, his tone suddenly aggressive. "You're going to give us a ride. Get in the passenger seat." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I fumbled with my keys, managing to unlock the car. "Please," I stammered. "I don't want any trouble. Just let me go." The guy in the cap grabbed my arm. "We're not asking. Get in the fucking car." In that moment, pure terror took over. I yanked my arm free and dove into the passenger seat, slamming and locking the door behind me. The men started pounding on the windows, yelling at me to open up. I scrambled across to the driver's seat, but I knew I was trapped. There wasn't enough room to pull out with their car blocking me in. My mind was racing, trying desperately to think of a way out. Then it hit me, the horn. I slammed my hand down on the steering wheel and just held it there. The loud, continuous honking shattered the quiet night. I prayed it would be enough to draw attention, to make these guys back off. The men were going berserk outside, cursing and threatening me. The guy in the hoodie started trying to break the passenger window with his elbow. I was certain that any second the glass would shatter and they'd drag me out. Just when I thought it was all over, I heard shouting in the distance. "Hey, what the hell is going on over there?" I looked up and saw a middle-aged man in a bathrobe standing on his front porch about 3 houses down, holding what looked like a baseball bat. The two men immediately backed away from my car. "Nothing, man, just a misunderstanding," the one in the cap called out. But the neighbor wasn't buying it. He started walking towards us, bat in hand. "I'm calling the cops right now if you don't get the hell out of here." I've never seen two people move so fast in my life. They practically dove into their sedan and peeled out of there, tires screeching. As soon as they were clear, I gunned it in the opposite direction, not even caring about the delivery anymore. I just needed to get out of there. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel. I must have run at least 2 stop signs on my way out of that neighborhood. It wasn't until I was back on the main road that I finally let myself breathe. I called my boss as soon as I got home and told him what happened. He was super understanding and said I should take a few days off. I also filed a police report, but I doubt anything will come of it. I couldn't get a good look at the guys' faces, and I was too panicked to catch their license plate number. It's been a week, and I still get chills thinking about what could have happened if that neighbor hadn't shown up. I keep replaying it in my mind, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. Should I have been more aware of my surroundings? Should I have just driven away as soon as I saw them following me? I've started carrying pepper spray now, and I'm way more cautious about late-night deliveries. Part of me wants to quit altogether, but I need the money. I guess I'm sharing this as a warning to other delivery drivers out there. Always trust your gut and never let your guard down, even in nice neighborhoods. I still don't know what those guys wanted. Were they planning to rob me, carjack me, something worse? I try not to think about it too much, but it's hard not to. I'm just grateful I made it out of there in one piece. But I know it'll be a long time before I feel truly safe doing this job again. The bell above the door jingled, making me jump. I looked up to see a man stumble in, looking disheveled and exhausted. My first instinct was annoyance. We were clearly closed. The sign was turned and everything. But something about his demeanor made me pause. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we're closed for the night," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. He ignored me, shuffling towards the counter and slumping onto a stool. Up close, I could see his eyes were bloodshot and his clothes were stained. The smell of alcohol hit me, and I took an involuntary step back. "Just need a coffee," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. Against my better judgment, I decided to humor him. Maybe a cup of coffee would sober him up enough to leave without incident. I turned to grab the coffee pot, my back to him for just a moment. That's when everything changed. I heard a scraping sound behind me and whirled around to see the man standing now, a switchblade in his trembling hand. My blood ran cold as I realized how badly I had misjudged the situation. "Open the register," he growled, his voice low and menacing. My mind raced. The day's cash was already in the safe, which I couldn't open even if I wanted to, but I didn't think explaining that would go over well. "Sir, please," I started, my voice shaking. "We don't keep much cash on hand. It's all been—" He slammed his fist on the counter, making me flinch. "I said open it. Now!" I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling so badly I could barely get them in the lock. The register popped open with a cheerful ding that felt absurdly out of place. He shoved me aside roughly and started grabbing the meager bills inside. I stumbled back, my hip hitting the edge of the prep counter. Pain shot through me, but adrenaline kept me on my feet. As he stuffed the money in his pockets, his eyes darted around wildly. "Where's the rest? I know you got more stashed somewhere." "That's all there is, I swear," I pleaded, tears starting to form. "Please just take it and go." He advanced on me, brandishing the knife. "Don't lie to me, bitch. Where's the safe?" I backed away, my hands raised. I can't open it. It's on a time lock. Only the owner can." "Bullshit," he roared, lunging forward. I screamed and ducked, feeling the wind of the blade as it swung over my head. I scrambled towards the kitchen, desperate for some kind of weapon to defend myself. He was right behind me, grabbing at my shirt. I felt the fabric tear as I wrenched away, darting behind the grill. My eyes landed on the heavy cast-iron skillet hanging nearby. I grabbed it just as he rounded the corner. "Stay back!" I yelled, wielding the skillet like a shield. He hesitated for a moment, clearly not expecting resistance. That split second was all I needed. I hurled the skillet at him with all my might and bolted for the back door. I heard him curse as the skillet connected, but I didn't look back. My fingers fumbled with the deadbolt, precious seconds ticking by as I struggled to unlock it. Finally, it gave way, and I burst out into the alley behind the diner. The cool night air hit my face as I ran, my feet pounding on the pavement. I had no plan, no destination in mind, just an overwhelming need to put as much distance between myself and that madman as possible. I don't know how long I ran. My lungs were burning. My legs felt like jelly. But the fear kept me going, imagining him right behind me, knife raised. Finally, I spotted a 24-hour convenience store up ahead, its fluorescent lights a beacon of hope. I burst through the doors, startling the bored-looking clerk behind the counter. "Please," I gasped, "call the police. There's a man. He tried to rob the diner. He has a knife." The clerk's eyes widened, and he quickly grabbed the phone. As he dialed 911, I collapsed against the counter, my legs finally giving out. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me shaky and nauseous. It felt like an eternity before I heard sirens approaching. 2 police cars pulled up outside, and officers rushed in. I gave them a breathless account of what happened, watching as they radioed for backup to check out the diner. One of the officers stayed with me while his partner went to investigate. He tried to calm me down, asking for more details about the attacker, but all I could think about was how close I'd come to. I couldn't even finish the thought. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, the radio crackled to life. They'd found him, still at the diner. He'd apparently passed out in the kitchen, surrounded by empty liquor bottles he'd raided from the bar. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The reality of what had happened began to sink in. My safe little diner, the place I'd worked for years, had become a crime scene. The thought of going back there made me physically ill. The next few days passed in a blur, giving statements to detectives, dealing with insurance claims, trying to reassure my shaken staff. I couldn't bring myself to reopen right away. The thought of being there alone again was too much to bear. It took weeks before I could step foot in the diner without having a panic attack. Even then, I jumped at every little noise, constantly looking over my shoulder. I installed new security cameras, better locks, a panic button under the counter, but it wasn't enough to make me feel truly safe again. I started closing earlier, making sure there were always at least 2 people on staff until the doors were locked. I became hyper-vigilant about unfamiliar faces, scrutinizing every customer who walked through the door. My employees noticed the change in me. Gone was the easygoing boss they'd known. In her place was a nervous, jumpy woman who flinched at sudden movements and triple-checked the locks. I tried to explain it to them, to make them understand the need for all the new security measures. But how could I convey the sheer terror of that night? The feeling of utter helplessness as a stranger threatened my life over a few $100s in the till. Nightmares plagued me for months. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I could hear the jingle of the bell above the door. Sometimes in my dreams, I wasn't fast enough. I'd feel the bite of the knife, see my own blood pooling on the checkered floor. Even now, years later, I'm not the same person I was before that night. The carefree small-town diner owner is gone, replaced by someone always looking over her shoulder, always prepared for the worst. I still run the diner. I couldn't let him take that from me too, but it's different now. There's a heaviness in the air, an undercurrent of tension that wasn't there before. My regulars have noticed, though they're too polite to say anything. They just give me sad, understanding smiles when I start at a loud noise or peer suspiciously at unfamiliar faces. I've thought about selling the place, starting fresh somewhere else. But this diner was my dream, my life's work. I can't let one horrible night destroy everything I've built. So I stay, I adapt, I survive. But I'll never forget that night. The night my quiet little diner became a waking nightmare. The night I learned that safety is an illusion, that danger can walk through your door at any moment. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before opening or after closing, I can still hear the echo of that bell jingling. And for a split second, I'm back there, facing down a desperate man with a knife, wondering if I'll make it out alive. They say time heals all wounds, but some scars run too deep, leaving marks that never truly fade. My diner still stands, still serves the best coffee and pie in town. But for me, it will always be the place where my sense of security shattered like a fallen plate on that terrifying night. It was just another late shift at the diner near campus. I've been working there for months to keep my old Honda running and chip away at my tuition. Usually, it's pretty uneventful, just your typical drunk college kid stumbling in for greasy food at 2 a.m. But that night was different. I first noticed him around 11 p.m. He sat alone in a booth, nursing a cup of coffee. Nothing unusual about that, except for the way he kept staring at me. Not just glancing, but full-on staring. Every time I looked up from wiping tables or refilling drinks, his eyes were locked on me. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. But as the night wore on, the pit in my stomach grew. He barely touched his coffee, just sat there for hours, watching my every move. Around 1 a.m., when I went to refill his cup, he started asking questions. Innocent enough at first, how long I'd worked there, if I was a student. But then they got weirdly specific. What time did my shift end? What kind of car did I drive? Where did I live? I gave vague answers, trying to be polite but distant. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely pour the coffee. I wanted to tell my manager, but I felt stupid. The guy hadn't actually done anything wrong. Maybe I was overreacting. By the time my shift ended at 3 a.m., I was a nervous wreck. I practically ran to my car, fumbling with my keys. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I saw headlights flick on behind me. It was an ordinary sedan, nothing remarkable. But somehow, I knew it was him. I tried to convince myself I was being ridiculous. Lots of people leave bars and diners at 3 a.m., right? But as I drove, taking random turns through empty streets, the car stayed right behind me. Close enough to make me nervous, but not so close it was obvious. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I took a sharp right turn without signaling, and the car behind me did the same. That's when I knew for sure. He was following me. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't go home. What if he found out where I lived? I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Someone's following me, but they haven't actually done anything. I decided to test it one more time. I pulled into a 24-hour gas station, circling around the pumps before heading back out. Sure enough, the sedan followed my exact path, never stopping. Panic set in. I started driving faster, taking random turns, trying to lose him. But no matter what I did, those headlights stayed right behind me. I ran red lights, made illegal U-turns, anything to shake him off. But he matched my every move. I was full-on sobbing at this point, barely able to see the road through my tears. I had no idea where I was anymore. All I knew was that I couldn't stop, couldn't let him catch me. That's when I remembered the police station. It was on the other side of town, but it was my only hope. I took a deep breath and floored it, praying I remembered the way. The drive felt like it took hours. Every second I expected to feel his car ram into mine, to see him pull up beside me with a gun. My hands were sweating so bad I could barely hold the wheel. Finally, I saw the police station up ahead. I screeched into the parking lot, tires squealing. As I threw the car into park, I looked in my rearview mirror. The sedan slowed down as it approached the station, then suddenly made a U-turn and sped off into the night. I collapsed over the steering wheel, sobbing uncontrollably. A concerned officer came out to check on me. Through my tears, I managed to explain what happened. They took my statement, but without a license plate or clear description, there wasn't much they could do. It's been weeks, and they still haven't found the guy. I've switched to day shifts at the diner, but I can't shake the feeling that he's out there, watching, waiting. I check my rearview mirror constantly when I drive. I've installed new locks on all my doors and windows. I jump at every little noise. The worst part is, I don't know why. Why me? What did he want? The not knowing is almost worse than the fear. Was it just a sick game to him? Or did he have something much worse planned? I keep replaying that night in my head, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. Should I have confronted him in the diner? Called the police earlier? What if I hadn't made it to the station? My friends tell me I need to move on, that I'm safe now. But they don't understand. How can I feel safe when I know there's someone out there who hunted me like prey? Someone who knows what I look like, where I work, what car I drive. I'm trying to get back to normal life, but it's hard. I flinch every time a car pulls up behind me at a stoplight. I can't sit with my back to the door in restaurants anymore. I've started taking self-defense classes, but I'm not sure it's helping. How do you defend yourself against a threat you can't see coming? The police say there haven't been any similar reports, which should make me feel better. But it doesn't, because that means he was targeting me specifically, and I have no idea why. I keep wondering if he'll come back. If one day I'll look up and see those eyes staring at me again. The anticipation is almost worse than the actual night it happened. At least then, I knew what I was dealing with. Now, every shadow could be him. I'm writing this partly to warn others, partly to try and process what happened. If you're reading this and you've experienced something similar, please know you're not alone. And if you haven't, please be aware of your surroundings. Trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe again, but I'm trying. I'm in therapy now, working through the trauma. Some days are better than others. I'm learning to be more aware of my surroundings without letting the fear control me. But I'll never forget that night. The feeling of being hunted, of being completely alone and terrified. The realization that the world isn't as safe as I thought it was. That ordinary-looking people can have the darkest intentions. So if you're out there, working late shifts, driving home alone at night, be careful. Watch your surroundings, trust your instincts, and if you ever feel like someone's following you, don't second-guess yourself. Get somewhere safe, call for help, because you never know when an ordinary night can turn into your worst nightmare. It was around 11 p.m., and I was wiping down the counter when the phone rang. Nothing unusual there. We often get calls for takeout orders. I picked up with my usual cheerful greeting. "Rosie's Diner, how can I help you?" There was silence on the other end. Just as I was about to hang up, a man's voice came through, low and gravelly. "Are you alone?" he asked. A chill ran down my spine. "Excuse me?" I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I asked if you were alone," he repeated, his tone flat and emotionless. I slammed the phone down, my heart racing. It was probably just some creep, I told myself. No big deal. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled over me. About 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. Against my better judgment, I answered. The same voice. "Who else is there with you?" This time I didn't bother responding. I hung up immediately and tried to focus on my work, but my hands were shaking as I poured coffee for the few customers we had. The calls kept coming, every 15 to 20 minutes. Each time the questions got more specific, more unsettling. "What color shirt are you wearing? Did you lock the back door? That trucker in the corner booth, when did he come in?" I was terrified. How did he know these things? Was he watching me? I wanted to call the police, but what would I tell them? That some weirdo was asking me creepy questions. I had no proof, no threat of violence, just a gnawing fear in the pit of my stomach. Around 1 a.m. a man walked in and sat at the counter. There was something off about him from the start. He was dressed normally enough, jeans, a dark jacket, baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. But he never looked up at me directly, and he kept fiddling with something in his pocket. I approached cautiously to take his order. "What can I get you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from trembling. He finally looked up, and his eyes sent ice through my veins. They were cold, calculating. A slight smirk played at the corners of his mouth. "Just coffee," he said. His voice was different from the one on the phone, but something about his demeanor made my skin crawl. As I turned to get his coffee, the phone rang again. I froze, looking back at the man. He was staring intently at me, that same unsettling smirk on his face. I let it ring, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. When I brought his coffee, he spoke again. "Aren't you going to answer that? It might be important." I mumbled something about it probably being a wrong number and retreated to the other end of the counter. The phone kept ringing, and the man's eyes never left me. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I picked up the phone with a shaking hand. "Hello?" The gravelly voice was back. "I see you've met my friend. He says your hair looks nice tonight." I dropped the phone like it had burned me. The man at the counter chuckled softly, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. That was it. I ran to the back office and called 911, my voice breaking as I tried to explain the situation to the dispatcher. They said they'd send a car right away. When I came back out, the man was gone. But he'd left something on the counter, a small flip phone and a pair of earbuds. My blood ran cold as I realized the implications. The police arrived a few minutes later. They took my statement and looked around, but there wasn't much they could do. The man was long gone, and the phone he'd left behind was a burner. No way to trace it. I quit my job at the diner that night. I couldn't bear the thought of going back, of answering that phone again. For weeks afterward, I jumped every time my own phone rang. I installed new locks, got a security system, even moved to a new apartment. But none of it has helped shake the feeling that I'm being watched, that somewhere out there, that man is still waiting, still planning. Every time I see someone in a baseball cap, my heart races. Every unknown number that calls sends me into a panic. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. The rational part of my brain tells me it was just some sick prank, that I'm overreacting. But late at night, when the house is quiet and dark, I can still hear that gravelly voice asking, "Are you alone?" I wish I could say there was some satisfying resolution, some explanation for what happened that night. But the truth is, I'm left with nothing but questions and a constant gnawing fear. Who were those men? What did they want? Why me? The police never found anything. The burner phone was a dead end, and the security cameras at the diner were too grainy to get a clear image of the man's face. It's like he appeared out of nowhere and vanished just as quickly. I've tried to move on, to convince myself it was just a random, terrifying occurrence. But deep down, I know better. The level of coordination, the specific knowledge they had about the diner and me, it couldn't have been random. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if it's really over. If one day I'll pick up my phone and hear that gravelly voice again. Or worse, turn around and see that cold-eyed man watching me. I've become a shadow of my former self. I used to be outgoing, confident. Now, I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, analyzing every stranger's face for a hint of recognition. I've lost friends who couldn't understand why I've changed so much, why I refuse to go out at night or answer calls from numbers I don't know. The worst part is the not knowing. If there had been some clear motive, some explanation, maybe I could process it and move on. But this formless, nameless terror, it's like a cancer that's eaten away at my sense of security, my trust in the world around me. I've seen therapists, joined support groups for victims of stalking and harassment. But how do you move past something you can't understand? How do you heal from a wound that has no clear edges? There are moments when I think I'm getting better, when I can go a whole day without reliving that night in my mind. But then something small will trigger me. A ringing phone, a man in a baseball cap, the smell of coffee, and I'm right back there, paralyzed with fear. I know this probably sounds paranoid. Hell, half the time I think I'm going crazy. But I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. That somewhere out there, those men are laughing, planning their next move. And all I can do is wait, wondering if every day will be the day they decide to finish whatever game they started. So I live my life in a state of constant vigilance. I work from home now, have my groceries delivered, rarely go out except in broad daylight. It's not much of a life, but it's the only way I've found to cope with the lingering terror of that night. I'm sharing this story not because I expect anyone to solve the mystery or ease my fears. I'm sharing it as a warning. Be careful. Be aware of your surroundings. And if you ever pick up the phone and hear a gravelly voice ask, "Are you alone?" hang up immediately and run. Run far and fast, and pray they don't find you like they found me. Because once they do, you'll never feel truly safe again. Every shadow will hide a threat. Every phone call will carry the potential for terror. And you'll be left like me, jumping at every sound, questioning every stranger, and wondering if you'll ever reclaim the person you used to be. It was a slow evening, just a couple regulars nursing their coffees. Around 1 a.m., the place had cleared out completely. I was wiping down the counter for the 100th time when I heard a noise coming from the back. At first, I thought it was just the old pipes acting up again, but then I heard it more clearly, a sort of low mumbling sound. My first thought was that maybe one of our regulars had fallen asleep in a booth, so I did a quick walkthrough of the dining area. Empty. The noise was definitely coming from the restrooms. As I approached, my skin started to prickle. Something felt off. I called out, "Hello? Anyone in there?" No response, just more indistinct muttering. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the men's room door. The smell hit me first, a mix of sweat and something sour that made my nose wrinkle. And there, huddled in the corner by the sinks, was a man I'd never seen before. He was probably in his 40s, but it was hard to tell. His clothes were filthy and torn, his hair matted. He was rocking back and forth slightly, arms wrapped around his knees, staring at nothing. "Sir," I said cautiously, "the restaurant is closed. You can't stay in here." His head snapped up and I took an involuntary step back. His eyes were wild, bloodshot. For a moment he just stared at me, then he started speaking rapidly. "They're coming. They're always coming. Can't let them find me. Have to hide. Have to stay safe. You don't understand. No one understands. They're in the walls, in the air. Watching. Always watching." A chill ran down my spine. This guy was clearly not well. I tried to keep my voice calm as I said, "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave now. Do you need me to call someone for you?" He lurched to his feet suddenly, and I nearly bolted out the door, but he didn't come towards me. Instead, he pressed himself against the wall, fingers scrabbling at the tile. "No, can't leave. Not safe out there. They'll get me. You don't know what they can do, what they've already done. I've seen it. I know the truth." My heart was pounding. I needed to get this guy out of here, but I was scared to get any closer to him. He seemed to have forgotten I was there, muttering to himself and feeling along the wall like he was searching for something. I backed out of the bathroom slowly and pulled the door shut. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone to call the police. As I waited for them to arrive, I could still hear his muffled voice through the door, rising and falling in a fevered monologue. The cops showed up about 10 minutes later. I led them to the bathroom and explained the situation. They entered cautiously, hands on their weapons. I hung back, not wanting to see what happened next. There was some shouting, a scuffle. Then they emerged, the man between them. He looked smaller somehow, deflated. His eyes darted around wildly as they led him out. Just before they got to the exit, he locked eyes with me. The intensity of his gaze froze me in place. "You'll see," he said. "Soon you'll understand. They're coming for all of us." Then he was gone. One of the officers stayed behind to take my statement. He told me they suspected mental health issues, possibly drug-induced psychosis. They'd take him to the hospital for evaluation. After they left, I stood there for a long time, staring at the bathroom door. The diner felt different somehow, like the air itself had changed. I kept replaying the man's words in my head, feeling a creeping unease. I didn't sleep well that night when I got home. Every noise made me jump. I kept thinking I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. The next day, I went to my boss and insisted we install better security cameras and change the locks. I started checking the bathrooms obsessively during my shifts, always half expecting to find someone hiding there. It's been a week now, and I still can't shake the feeling that something's not right. I find myself looking over my shoulder constantly, wondering if there's some truth to what that man was saying. Are we really being watched? Is there something out there, hiding just beyond what we can see? I know it sounds crazy. The rational part of my brain says it was just a random encounter with a disturbed individual, but another part of me can't let it go. His eyes were so certain, so afraid. What if he really did know something? I'm writing this down partly to try and process it all, partly because I'm scared I might be starting to lose it a little myself. Has anyone else ever experienced anything like this? Am I overreacting, or should I be worried? Sometimes at night, when the diner is empty and quiet, I swear I can still hear his voice, whispering from the shadows. They're coming. They're always coming. I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe at work again. Every customer that comes in, I find myself wondering, are they one of them? Am I being paranoid, or just finally waking up to a truth I've been blind to all along? I keep telling myself it'll get better with time, that eventually this will just become another weird story from the night shift. But deep down, I'm not so sure. Something changed that night. I changed, and I can't shake the feeling that it's only the beginning. A few months ago, my husband and I moved our family to a beautiful craftsman house in Raleigh. We were so excited for a fresh start, new jobs, new schools for the kids, a charming neighborhood. Everything seemed perfect at first. The day we moved in, I remember feeling so happy as we unpacked boxes and got settled. Our son Tyler was running around exploring every nook and cranny of the house, while our daughter Zoe was busy arranging all her stuffed animals in her new room. My husband and I shared a relieved smile, thinking we'd made the right choice for our family. That first night, we were all exhausted from the move and fell into a deep sleep. Around 3 a.m., I jolted awake to a loud thump. At first I thought it was just the house settling, but then I heard it again. A deliberate knocking sound coming from downstairs. My heart started racing. I shook my husband awake and we crept down to investigate, but found nothing out of place. The doors were locked, windows secure. We chalked it up to leftover moving stress and overactive imaginations. But the knocks continued night after night. Sometimes faint taps, other times loud bangs that echoed through the whole house. We'd search every time but never found anything. The kids started having trouble sleeping. I'd find Tyler huddled in Zoe's room in the morning, both of them wide-eyed and jumpy. Then the notes started appearing. I still get chills thinking about the first one I found. It was a plain white envelope sitting on our front porch when I went to grab the newspaper. Inside was a handwritten note that said, "I'm always watching. This is my house." I nearly dropped it in shock. I showed my husband and we immediately called the police. They came out but said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. They suggested setting up cameras, which we did that same day. But the notes kept coming, always when we weren't looking. Get out while you can. I know your routines. The children aren't safe here. Each one more disturbing than the last. We were on constant high alert. I'd check and double-check the locks obsessively. My husband started working from home to keep an eye on things. The kids weren't allowed to play outside anymore. Our dream home had become a fortress of fear. One evening I was washing dishes and glanced out the kitchen window. My blood ran cold when I saw a figure standing at the edge of our yard, partially hidden behind a tree. It was a woman, middle-aged with long, dark hair. She was just staring at the house. I blinked, and she was gone. I told my husband what I saw, and he insisted on doing another security check of the property. As he walked the perimeter, he found fresh footprints in the flower bed beneath the kids' bedroom windows. That was the final straw. We packed up the kids and stayed at a hotel that night. The next day, we met with a private investigator. He did some digging and discovered the woman I saw was likely the ex-wife of the previous homeowner. Apparently, she had some kind of mental breakdown after their divorce and became obsessed with the house. The investigator warned us to be extra cautious. Things escalated quickly after that. One night, we woke up to the sound of shattering glass. Someone had thrown a rock through our living room window. Scrawled on it in red marker were the words, "You can't hide." We were terrified, but determined not to let her win. We increased security, installed better lights, got a guard dog. but nothing seemed to stop her. She'd leave dead flowers on the porch. We'd catch glimpses of her watching us from across the street. The kids were too scared to sleep in their own rooms anymore. It all came to a head about a week ago. I was home alone, the kids at school and my husband at a doctor's appointment. I heard a noise in the backyard and went to check it out. As I peered out the back door, I saw her. She was crouched by our shed, furiously writing in a notebook. I called 911 with shaking hands and watched in horror as she noticed me and started walking towards the house. Her eyes were wild, her movements erratic. I ran to lock the door, but she was too quick. She burst in, screaming incoherently about how this was her home, her family. I grabbed a kitchen knife and backed away, pleading with her to leave. She lunged at me just as the police sirens became audible. In the struggle, I managed to knock the notebook from her hands. It fell open, revealing pages and pages of detailed notes about our daily routines, our schedules, even what we ate for dinner each night. The police arrived moments later and arrested her. They found more evidence at her apartment, photos of us, copies of our keys, elaborate plans to terrorize us out of the house. She's in custody now, facing multiple charges. But even though she's locked up, I can't shake this feeling of dread. Every creak of the house makes me jump. I check the locks constantly. The kids still won't sleep alone. My husband and I take turns staying awake at night, just in case. I don't know if we'll ever feel safe here again. The rational part of me knows she can't hurt us anymore, but the fear has seeped into every corner of our lives. Will we ever be able to relax in our own home? Will my kids grow up always looking over their shoulders? I'm writing this as a cautionary tale, I guess. You never know what secrets a house might hold, what obsessions might be lurking just out of sight. We thought we found our dream home, but it turned into a nightmare we can't wake up from. I just hope that someday we'll be able to feel at peace again. But for now, every shadow holds a threat. Every unexpected sound sends my heart racing. The terror may have ended, but the trauma lives on. I'm a 40-year-old IT tech, and last year I decided to invest in some property. I found this great duplex in Syracuse that seemed perfect. I could live in the upper unit and rent out the lower one for some extra income. It was a bit of a fixer-upper, but I got a good deal on it and figured I could handle the renovations myself. For the first few weeks after moving in, everything seemed fine. I was busy settling in, unpacking boxes, and starting on some of the repair work. But then I started noticing weird things happening at night. At first it was just faint noises coming from downstairs, scratching sounds, creaks, thumps. I tried to brush it off as the house settling or maybe a mouse problem, but it kept getting worse. One night I woke up around 3 a.m. to what sounded like footsteps directly below my bedroom. My heart started racing as I lay there frozen, straining my ears. The footsteps moved across the floor, then stopped. A few seconds later, I heard a door open and close. I was freaked out, but I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me in the dark. Or maybe the downstairs unit wasn't as empty as I thought. Could someone have broken in to squat there? The next day, I did a thorough inspection of the lower unit. All the doors and windows were still locked tight. There were no signs of forced entry or anyone living there. I even set up a few security cameras, hoping to catch whatever was making those noises. For a few nights, things were quiet. I started to relax, thinking maybe I had just been overly paranoid. But then it started up again, worse than before. The cameras didn't pick up anything, but I could hear what sounded like someone walking around, opening cabinets, even talking in a low murmur. I was at my wits' end. I couldn't sleep, jumping at every little sound. During the day, I'd search the house over and over, looking for any sign of an intruder, but never found anything. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Finally, after about 2 weeks of this, I decided I needed help. I called a buddy who's a local cop and asked him to come check things out. He did a walkthrough of both units, but didn't find anything suspicious. As we were about to give up, he noticed something odd about one of the bedroom closets downstairs. The back panel looked slightly off, like it didn't quite fit right. When we pushed on it, it swung open like a door. Behind it was a small, dark crawl space that led under the house. My blood ran cold as I realized someone could have been hiding in there this whole time. We called for backup and did a full search of the crawl space. That's when we found him, a man in his 50s, scruffy and wild-eyed, who had apparently been living under my house for weeks. He had a sleeping bag, some food and water, even a bucket he'd been using as a toilet. The cops arrested him, and I later found out he was a homeless man with a history of mental illness who had been squatting in abandoned buildings around the city. Somehow he had discovered this hidden access panel and decided to make it his new home. I was relieved to finally have an explanation, but also deeply shaken. This man had been living right under my feet, coming and going as he pleased, probably watching me through the vents. Who knows what he might have done if he'd decided to confront me directly. It's been a few months now, and I've had all the crawl space access points sealed up. I've installed a top-of-the-line security system. Logically, I know the house is safe now, but I still can't relax. Every little noise makes me tense up. I find myself constantly checking closets and under beds, half expecting to find someone hiding there. The worst part is the nightmares. I keep dreaming that I wake up to find that man standing over my bed, grinning at me. Sometimes in the dreams, I try to run, but my legs won't move. Other times I open my eyes and he's right there, his face inches from mine. I've thought about selling the house and moving, but the idea of starting over somewhere new is overwhelming. And a part of me is afraid that if I leave, I'll just be running from my fears instead of facing them. So I'm still here, trying to convince myself that it's over, that I'm safe now. But every night as I lie in bed, I find myself straining to hear any hint of movement from below. And I wonder, what if he comes back? What if there are others out there, looking for a hidden space to claim as their own? I don't know if I'll ever feel truly at peace in this house again. The sanctity of my home has been violated in a way I never could have imagined. All I can do is try to move forward, one day at a time, and hope that eventually the fear will fade. But for now, every creak and bump in the night sends a chill down my spine, and I'm left wondering, am I really alone? I never thought I'd be the type of person to believe in haunted houses, but after what happened to me in Tampa, I'm not so sure anymore. It all started when I moved into this charming vintage bungalow last summer. I just accepted a teaching position at a local elementary school and was excited for a fresh start in a new city. The house seemed perfect, quaint and full of character, with original hardwood floors and big windows that let in lots of natural light. I fell in love with it immediately and signed the lease without hesitation. The first few weeks were great. I spent my time unpacking, decorating, and preparing for the upcoming school year. But then strange things started happening. At first, it was just little things I could easily explain away. Items not being where I remembered putting them, odd creaking noises at night. But then the lights started acting up. It began with the kitchen light flickering occasionally. I figured it was just an old house with faulty wiring and made a mental note to call an electrician. But then I noticed the living room lamp would turn on and off by itself, even when it wasn't plugged in. I'd walk into a room and the overhead light would suddenly come on, then shut off as soon as I left. At first I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was a short in the electrical system, or the neighbor's Wi-Fi was somehow interfering with my smart bulbs. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The lights weren't just malfunctioning randomly. There was an eerie intentionality to it, almost like the house was trying to communicate. Things escalated quickly after that. One night I was grading papers in the living room when the TV suddenly turned on by itself, blaring static at full volume. I jumped up to turn it off, my heart racing. As soon as I touched the power button, every light in the house went out simultaneously. I stood there frozen in the pitch darkness, straining my ears for any sound. The silence was deafening. Just as I was about to make a dash for the front door, a single light flickered on upstairs. It was coming from the hallway outside the attic door. My breath caught in my throat as I watched it blink on and off in a distinct pattern. It was almost like Morse code, beckoning me to come upstairs. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to get out of that house, but a morbid curiosity took over. I found myself slowly climbing the stairs, drawn to that blinking light like a moth to a flame. When I reached the top, the attic door was cracked open slightly. A chill ran down my spine as I realized I always kept that door locked. With trembling hands, I pushed the door open wider. The attic was pitch black, except for a single bare bulb swinging gently from the rafters. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were dozens of shadowy figures lining the walls, their featureless faces all turned towards me. I blinked hard, praying it was just a trick of the light. But when I opened my eyes, they were still there. A low humming noise filled the air, growing louder by the second. The shadows began to move, detaching from the walls and drifting towards me. I stumbled backwards, slamming the door shut. I flew down the stairs in a panic, not daring to look back. I grabbed my keys and ran out to my car, peeling out of the driveway as fast as I could. It wasn't until I was several miles away that I finally allowed myself to breathe. I spent that night in a motel, too terrified to go back to the house. The next day, I went straight to the landlord's office and told him I was breaking my lease effective immediately. He seemed unsurprised, almost like he'd been expecting it. When I pressed him for answers, he just shook his head sadly and said, "Some houses have a mind of their own. This one's been through a lot." I never went back to that bungalow. I left all my belongings behind, too scared to step foot inside again. I ended up crashing on a coworker's couch until I could find a new place. Even now, months later, I still have nightmares about those shadows in the attic. I've tried to make sense of what happened, but I can't come up with any logical explanation. Was the house really haunted? Or was it all just an elaborate hallucination brought on by stress and an overactive imagination? I don't know if I'll ever have answers, but one thing's for sure. I'll never look at flickering lights the same way again. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed in that attic longer. Would the shadows have engulfed me? Would I have learned some dark secret about the house's past? Part of me is glad I'll never know, but another part of me can't help but feel like I narrowly escaped something truly sinister. I've done some research since then, trying to find out if anyone else had similar experiences in that house. I haven't found much, but there are whispers around town about other tenants who fled in the middle of the night. Some say the land the house was built on is cursed. Others claim it was the site of a gruesome murder decades ago. Whatever the truth is, I know what I saw and felt in that house. The way the lights seemed to have a mind of their own, guiding me towards the attic. The bone-chilling terror I felt when I saw those shadowy figures. It was all too real to be written off as just my imagination. I still teach at the same school, but I've moved to an apartment on the other side of town. I keep all my lights on LED bulbs now, and I never stay anywhere with an attic. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear that low humming noise again. I don't know if I'll ever fully recover from what happened in that bungalow. It's changed the way I see the world. I used to be a skeptic, but now I can't help but wonder what other unexplainable things might be out there. What unseen forces might be at work around us. All I know is that I'll never forget those few terrifying weeks in Tampa. The image of those shadows reaching for me is seared into my brain. Sometimes I catch myself staring at the lights in my new place, half expecting them to start blinking out a message. So far, they've stayed mercifully still, but a part of me is always waiting, wondering if one day they'll start trying to tell me something again. I've thought about reaching out to paranormal investigators or mediums to try to get some closure, but honestly, I'm afraid of what they might uncover. Maybe it's better not knowing. Maybe some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved. For now, I'm just trying to move on with my life and put the whole experience behind me. But late at night, when the house is quiet and the shadows grow long, I can't help but remember the terror I felt in that attic. And I wonder if somewhere out there, in that old bungalow in Tampa, those lights are still blinking their eerie message to whoever's brave enough or foolish enough to answer their call. My husband John and I had been looking to move for a while. We wanted more space for our kids, Liam, 8, and Sophie, 6, and found this beautiful old Victorian home in a quiet neighborhood. It seemed perfect, spacious, full of character, with a big backyard for the kids to play in. We got a great deal on it too, which should have been our first red flag. We moved in on a Saturday in early September. The kids were thrilled to explore their new rooms and the backyard. John and I spent that first weekend unpacking and getting settled. Everything seemed normal at first. The house creaked a bit at night, but that's to be expected with an older home. It was about a week later that I first noticed something odd. I was tidying up the kids' playroom and found a bunch of new drawings they'd done. Liam and Sophie loved to draw, so that wasn't unusual. But as I flipped through them, I realized they all showed the same thing. A tall, thin man standing in our backyard. The figure was crude, as you'd expect from kids' drawings, but unmistakably the same in each picture. I asked the kids about it casually, not wanting to make a big deal. "Oh, that's the man who lives in the yard," Sophie said matter-of-factly. Liam nodded in agreement. I felt a chill run down my spine, but tried to stay calm. "What do you mean, sweetie?" I asked. Sophie just shrugged. "He's always there, by the big tree." I looked out the window at our empty backyard, my heart racing. There was no one there, of course. I told myself it was just the kid's imagination running wild in a new place. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Over the next few days, I kept finding more drawings. Always the same tall figure in the yard. I showed John, and he agreed it was strange, but said we shouldn't worry. Kids have imaginary friends all the time, right? But then other things started happening. Items would go missing, only to turn up in odd places. We'd hear footsteps upstairs when we were all downstairs. The kids insisted someone was singing to them at night, though John and I never heard it. About 2 weeks after we moved in, I was in the attic, looking for some old photo albums. As I rummaged through boxes, I found a small trunk pushed into a corner. It was unlocked, so I opened it out of curiosity. Inside were stacks of yellowed papers, mostly repair receipts and notes about the house's construction, but mixed in were children's drawings. My blood ran cold as I realized they showed the same tall figure in the yard that Liam and Sophie had been drawing. I brought the drawings downstairs to show John. He was as freaked out as I was. We decided to do some research on the house's history. What we found chilled us to the bone. The house had been built in 1897 by a man named Edward Holloway. He was described as tall and thin, just like the figure in the drawings. According to old newspaper clippings, Holloway died in a freak accident just days after completing the house. He fell from a ladder while trimming a tree in the backyard, the same big tree Sophie had mentioned. That night, we sat the kids down and gently asked them more about the man in the yard. They described him in detail, tall and thin, wearing old-fashioned clothes, always standing by the tree. It matched the description of Holloway perfectly. Sophie said he seemed sad and lonely. Liam said sometimes he would wave at them. John and I were terrified, but we didn't want to scare the kids. We decided to keep a close eye on things and see if it got worse. It did. Over the next week, the activity in the house ramped up. Doors would slam on their own. We'd hear whistling coming from empty rooms. One night, I woke up to find all the faucets in the house running full blast. The final straw came about a month after we moved in. I was tucking Sophie into bed when she asked, "Mommy, why does the sad man want us to leave?" My heart nearly stopped. "What do you mean, honey?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "He told me and Liam that this is his house," she said sleepily. "He said we need to go away so he can rest." I ran to get John, and we agreed then and there that we couldn't stay another night. We packed up the kids and some essentials and went to a hotel. The next day we started looking for a new place to live. We never went back to that house except to have movers pack up our things. I couldn't bring myself to step foot inside again. We sold it as quickly as we could, taking a big financial hit in the process, but it was worth it to feel safe again. It's been a few months now in our new home. The kids have stopped drawing the tall man. They don't talk about him anymore. But sometimes I catch Liam or Sophie staring out the window with a wistful look, as if searching for something. And on quiet nights, I swear I can still hear faint whistling on the wind. I don't know if I believe in ghosts. I can't explain what happened in that house. But I know what we experienced was real. Something was there with us. Something that didn't want us around. I'm just grateful we got out when we did. I often wonder about the family living there now. I hope they're okay. But part of me thinks that sad, lonely spirit will always be there, guarding the house he built and never got to live in. The only place open at that hour was this old, run-down gas station on the outskirts of town. I'd driven past it 100 times, but never actually stopped there. It looked abandoned most of the time, with flickering lights and peeling paint. But beggars can't be choosers when you're running on fumes at 2 in the morning. I pulled up to the pump, feeling uneasy as soon as I got out of my car. The place was dead silent except for the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid from working late, but my skin was crawling. As I was fumbling with my credit card at the pump, I heard footsteps behind me. I whirled around to see a man in a crisp gas station uniform walking towards me with purpose. He looked totally out of place. His clothes were pristine, like they'd never seen a day of work. "Evening, ma'am," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Having some trouble there?" I muttered that I was fine, just trying to get some gas. But he kept coming closer. "Why don't you let me take a look at your car? Might be more than just low fuel causing you problems," he insisted. I declined again, more firmly this time, but he wasn't taking no for an answer. He started circling my car, peering in the windows and trying the door handles. My heart was pounding out of my chest. "Really, I insist," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Pop the hood and I'll check it out for you." Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get out of there. I've worked nights long enough to trust my gut when it comes to creeps, and this guy was setting off every alarm bell. I fumbled for my keys and practically dove into the driver's seat, locking the doors behind me. The man's face contorted with anger as he realized I wasn't going along with whatever he had planned. He started pounding on my window, yelling at me to open up. I jammed the key in the ignition, praying my car would start, despite being nearly empty. By some miracle, the engine turned over. I slammed it into reverse and peeled out of there as fast as I could. In my rearview mirror, I saw the man sprinting after my car until I turned onto the main road. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel straight. I drove home in a daze, jumping at every shadow. I double and triple checked that all my doors were locked that night, but I still couldn't sleep a wink. A few days later, I was scrolling through local news when a headline made my blood run cold. "Suspect arrested in string of abductions from rural gas stations." There was a mugshot of the same man who'd tried to get me to open my car that night. Turns out he'd been posing as a gas station attendant, targeting women who stopped at isolated stations late at night. He'd lure them out of their cars to check the engine and then abduct them. 3 women had already gone missing. I sat there staring at my phone, realizing how close I'd come to being his next victim. If I hadn't trusted my instincts and gotten out of there when I did, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. I called the police right away to report my encounter. They took my statement and said it could help build the case against him. I hope it does. I hope no one else has to go through what those other women did, or what I narrowly escaped. It's been a few weeks now, but I still have nightmares about that night. I jump every time someone approaches me unexpectedly. I haven't worked a night shift since then. I just can't bring myself to be out alone after dark anymore. I keep replaying every moment in my head, thinking about what I could have done differently. Should I have noticed something was off sooner? Should I have just driven away as soon as I saw how sketchy the place looked? But I know I can't blame myself. I did the best I could in a terrifying situation, and I'm alive because of it. I'm sharing this as a reminder to always trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't worry about being polite or not wanting to offend someone. Your safety is what matters. I'm grateful every day that I listen to that little voice telling me to get out of there. I still get chills thinking about how differently things could have gone if I'd let him look at my car, or if my engine hadn't started. It was pure luck that I made it out of there. I don't take anything for granted anymore. I've started taking self-defense classes, carrying pepper spray, and being much more aware of my surroundings. I know I can't live in fear forever, but I also know I'll never let my guard down like that again. Sometimes I wonder about the other women who weren't as lucky as me. Did they have that same feeling of dread that I did? Did they try to get away? I hope they're still out there somewhere, and that the police are doing everything they can to find them. The gas station is closed now. Police tape still surrounds it as part of the ongoing investigation. Every time I drive past, my hands start shaking, and I have to pull over until the panic subsides. I know he's in jail now, but part of me is still terrified I'll see him there, waiting. I've thought about moving away, starting fresh somewhere new where I don't have this constant reminder. But I also feel like I need to stay, to testify if they need me to make sure he never gets the chance to hurt anyone else. It's strange how one moment can change your entire life. I used to be so carefree, never thinking twice about stopping for gas or working late. Now I'm hyper-vigilant, always looking over my shoulder. I'm not sure I'll ever feel truly safe again, but I'm alive. I'm here to tell my story and hopefully prevent others from going through the same thing. If even one person reads this and it helps them avoid a dangerous situation, then some good will have come from that terrifying night. I still have so many questions. How long had he been watching that gas station, waiting for victims? Were there others before the 3 they know about? How did he choose who to target? The police haven't released many details about the investigation, which I understand but also find frustrating. I want to know everything, to try to make sense of what happened. But I know I may never get all the answers. For now, I'm focusing on healing, on rebuilding my sense of safety. It's a slow process, but I'm getting there day by day. I'm grateful for my friends and family who've been so supportive, even when they don't fully understand what I'm going through. To anyone reading this who's been through something similar, you're not alone. It wasn't your fault. You did what you had to do to survive. Be kind to yourself as you heal. And to anyone who might find themselves in a situation that doesn't feel right, please trust yourself. Don't worry about seeming rude or paranoid. It's better to be safe than polite. Your instincts are there to protect you. Listen to them. I don't know if I'll ever be the same person I was before that night, but I'm still here, still fighting, and that's what matters. Stay safe out there, everyone. Trust your gut. It might just save your life. I'd been driving for hours and desperately needed to use the restroom. When I spotted an old gas station off the highway, I pulled in without hesitation. The place looked deserted, weeds growing through cracks in the concrete, faded signs, rust everywhere. But I was too focused on finding a toilet to care. As I approached the small building, I noticed an elderly man behind the counter inside. He barely glanced up as I entered, so I just made my way to the back where the restrooms were. The women's room door creaked loudly as I pushed it open. The smell of mildew and cleaning chemicals hit me immediately. The bathroom was tiny and dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. Everything looked ancient: cracked tiles, a rusted sink, graffiti covering the walls. But again, I was too desperate to be picky. I quickly locked the stall door and sat down to do my business. That's when things started to get weird. I heard footsteps outside the stall, slow and deliberate. My heart started racing. I called out, "Hello?" but got no response. The footsteps continued, circling the stall. I tried to peer through the cracks but couldn't see anyone. Suddenly the footsteps stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, terrified. After a few agonizing seconds, they moved away, and I heard the main bathroom door open and close. I let out a shaky sigh of relief, but when I tried to leave the stall, the lock wouldn't budge. I pushed and pulled frantically, but it was stuck tight. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. I started calling for help, pounding on the door, but no one came. I don't know how long I was in there. It felt like hours. I alternated between screaming for help and sitting in terrified silence. At one point, I heard those same slow footsteps return. They paced back and forth outside my stall for what seemed like forever. I was too scared to make a sound. Eventually, I worked up the courage to try calling out to the old man at the front. "Sir, please help. I'm stuck in here," I yelled as loud as I could. No response. I kept yelling and banging on the door. After what felt like an eternity, I heard shuffling outside, and a gravelly voice muttered, "Hold on." There was some rattling at the door, and suddenly it swung open. I stumbled out, shaking and on the verge of tears. The old man stood there, looking annoyed. "Door gets stuck sometimes," he grumbled, then turned and walked away without another word. I was stunned. How could he be so nonchalant? I quickly washed my hands and practically ran out of that bathroom. As I burst out of the gas station, something made me turn and look back. That's when I saw it, a dark figure standing in one of the windows, just watching me. It wasn't the old man. This was tall and gaunt, with glowing eyes. I blinked, and it was gone. I've never moved so fast in my life. I sprinted to my car, fumbling with the keys as I struggled to unlock it. As soon as I was inside, I locked the doors and peeled out of there, tires squealing. The whole drive home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, terrified I was being followed. Every shadow on the road made me flinch. I didn't feel safe until I was back in my apartment with the door bolted. It's been weeks, and I still can't shake the feeling of dread when I think about that place. What was that thing in the window? Why didn't the old man seem concerned? And those footsteps, who or what was in there with me? I've tried researching the area, looking for any stories about that gas station. But I can't even find it on a map now. It's like it never existed. Part of me wonders if I imagined the whole thing. But then I remember the paralyzing fear I felt trapped in that stall, and I know it was real. I haven't been able to use a public restroom since. Even in my own bathroom, I'm constantly checking behind the shower curtain, convinced something is lurking there. I keep reliving those moments over and over, questioning every detail. Was there more going on that I didn't notice? Should I have seen some sign of danger before I went in? The worst part is not knowing. Not knowing what really happened or why. Not knowing if I was in genuine danger or if my mind was playing tricks on me. Not knowing if that place still exists, waiting for other unsuspecting travelers. I used to love road trips and exploring new places. Now the thought of driving anywhere unfamiliar fills me with anxiety. I've become paranoid, always looking over my shoulder. That one experience has completely changed how I view the world. I know it probably sounds crazy. Most people I've told just laugh it off or tell me I must have been tired and imagining things. But I know what I experienced. The terror was real. The helplessness was real. And whatever I saw in that window was real too. Sometimes I think about going back, just to prove to myself that it was all in my head. But then I imagine pulling up to that desolate gas station again, seeing that figure watching me from the window, and I know I could never bring myself to do it. So I'm left with this lingering fear and these unanswered questions. Will I ever know the truth about what happened that day? Was I in real danger, or did I just freak myself out? All I know is that I'll never look at a gas station bathroom the same way again, and I'll always wonder about that mysterious place outside Tuscaloosa and what secrets it might be hiding. I've tried to move on, to forget about it and get back to normal life. But late at night, when I'm lying in bed, I still hear those slow, deliberate footsteps. I still feel the panic of being trapped, and I still see those glowing eyes watching me from the darkness. I don't know if I'll ever fully recover from what happened that day. All I can do is share my story and hope that maybe, somehow, it will help me make sense of it all. And maybe it will serve as a warning to others Be careful where you stop on those lonely highways. You never know what might be waiting for you behind that bathroom door. It was around 10 p.m. and I was driving back to my hotel after a long day of seminars. I'm not super familiar with Asheville, and somehow I ended up on this dark, winding road that seemed to go on forever. The trees loomed over the road, blocking out what little moonlight there was. My phone had died earlier, so I couldn't even pull up GPS. I just kept driving, hoping I'd eventually hit a main road or see some sign of civilization. That's when I noticed my gas gauge was dangerously low. My heart started racing as I realized I might end up stranded out here in the middle of nowhere. Just as panic was really setting in, I saw a faint glow in the distance. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of an old gas station. I pulled in, feeling a mix of relief and unease. The place looked abandoned, paint peeling off the walls, weeds growing up through cracks in the concrete. But there was a dim light on inside the little convenience store part, so I figured someone must be there. I got out of my car, the silence almost deafening after hours of driving. The air felt heavy, oppressive somehow. I walked up to the door, my heels clicking way too loudly on the pavement. Before I could even reach for the handle, the door swung open. A man stood there, tall and gaunt with deep-set eyes that seemed to stare right through me. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Need some gas, ma'am?" he asked in a raspy voice. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady as I replied, "Yes, please. I'm almost on empty." He stepped out of the store, way too close to me. I could smell stale cigarette smoke and something else I couldn't quite place. "Well now, we can't have a pretty lady like yourself stranded out here, can we?" he said with a chuckle that made my skin crawl. I took a step back, mumbling something about just needing to fill up quickly. He insisted on pumping the gas for me, saying the pumps were a bit tricky. I reluctantly handed him my credit card, which he took inside to run. As I waited by my car, I noticed how quiet it was. No crickets, no distant traffic, nothing. Just oppressive silence. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something felt very, very wrong. The man came back out, still holding my card. "Seems there's a problem with the machine," he said. "Why don't you come inside and we'll sort it out?" Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there. I stammered out some excuse about needing to make a phone call first and reached for my car door. His hand shot out, gripping my arm. "Now don't be like that," he said, his voice losing all pretense of friendliness. "I'm just trying to help you." I yanked my arm free and practically dove into my car, slamming the lock down. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. The man was at my window now, pounding on the glass. "You can't leave," he was yelling. "You need gas, remember?" I threw the car in reverse and peeled out of there as fast as I could. In my rearview mirror, I saw him running after the car for a few yards before stopping. The last thing I saw was him standing in the road, watching me drive away. I drove for what felt like hours, terrified he might be following me. Eventually, I found my way back to a main road and then to my hotel. I was still shaking when I got to my room. I called my husband right away, even though it was the middle of the night back home. When I told him what happened, he went into full cop mode, asking for every detail I could remember. He said he'd contact the Asheville PD to check it out. I barely slept that night, jumping at every little noise. The next morning, my husband called back. What he told me made my blood run cold. The Asheville police had gone out to the gas station I described. They found it completely abandoned, just like I'd thought at first. But here's the kicker. The gas pumps weren't even connected. There was no way that man could have pumped gas for me or anyone else. I still don't know what that man's intentions were that night. Was he planning to rob me, kidnap me, worse? The thoughts keep me up at night sometimes. I'm just grateful I trusted my instincts and got out of there when I did. Since that night, I've become hyper-vigilant about my surroundings, especially when traveling alone. I always make sure my phone is charged. I keep a portable charger with me, and I stick to well-lit, populated areas as much as possible. I've also started taking self-defense classes. Sometimes I wonder if I overreacted that night. Maybe the guy really was just trying to help, and I misread the situation. But then I remember the look in his eyes, the way he grabbed my arm, how he chased after my car. And I know in my gut that I did the right thing by getting out of there. I've tried to make sense of it all. Why was that man there in an abandoned gas station? What did he want from me? How long had he been there, waiting for someone like me to stop by? The questions keep swirling in my mind, but I know I'll probably never get answers. The experience has definitely changed me. I'm more cautious now, more aware of potential dangers, but it's also made me appreciate the importance of trusting your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't second-guess yourself or worry about being polite. Your safety is what matters most. I still travel for work, but I'm much more prepared now. I always let someone know my itinerary. I have multiple ways to contact help if needed, and I'm not afraid to be rude if a situation makes me uncomfortable. That night in Asheville taught me a valuable lesson, one that I think everyone, especially women traveling alone, needs to hear. Trust your gut. Be aware of your surroundings. Have a plan. And never, ever ignore that little voice inside that says something isn't right. I don't know what would have happened if I'd gone into that store with the man. I don't want to know. All I know is that I'm here, safe, because I listened to my instincts. And that's a lesson I'll never forget. I'd been on the road for about 14 hours straight, hauling a load of electronics from Seattle to Salt Lake City. The monotony of I-84 stretching endlessly before me had my eyelids getting heavy, so when I spotted the flickering neon 24-hour sign of a small gas station just off the highway, I decided to pull over. As I brought my rig to a stop in the gravel lot, something felt off right away. The place looked deserted, no other vehicles around, not even an employee's car. The fluorescent lights inside were on, but they cast an eerie glow in the pitch-black night. Still, I figured maybe the night clerk was just in the back restocking or something. I needed that coffee bad, so I hopped down from the cab and headed for the entrance. The bell above the door jangled as I stepped inside, but nobody came to greet me. "Hello," I called out. No response. The shelves were fully stocked, the coolers humming. It was like the place was frozen in time, waiting for customers who never came. My skin started to prickle with unease. I made my way to the coffee station in the back, telling myself I was being paranoid. Probably just a lazy employee sleeping in the office or something. But as I filled my cup, I heard a muffled thump coming from behind a door marked "Employees Only." My heart started racing. Every instinct told me to just leave, to get back in my truck and get the hell out of there. But something made me pause. What if someone was hurt back there and needed help? With trembling hands, I set down my coffee and cautiously approached the door. "Hello? Anyone back there?" I called out. Another thump, louder this time. And then I heard it, a faint, desperate whimper. Oh God, someone was in there, and they were in trouble. I tried the handle, locked. Taking a deep breath, I stepped back and then rammed my shoulder into the door as hard as I could. The flimsy lock gave way, and I stumbled into what looked like a small storage room. The sight that greeted me is seared into my memory forever. A man was lying on the floor, bound hand and foot with duct tape. His face was bruised and bloody, one eye swollen shut. A filthy rag was stuffed in his mouth as a gag. When he saw me, his one good eye went wide with terror, and he started thrashing, trying to speak through the gag. For a split second, I froze in shock. Then adrenaline kicked in and I rushed to help him. "It's okay. I'm here to help," I said, my voice shaking as I carefully removed the gag. The man gasped for air, coughing and sputtering. "Thank God," he choked out. They might come back any minute. Please, you have to get me out of here." My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the duct tape off. "Who did this to you?" I asked as I worked to free him. "Two guys, masks, robbed the place," he managed between labored breaths. "I'm the night clerk. They were going to kill me. Please, we have to go." As soon as I got the last of the tape off, I helped the man to his feet. He was unsteady, barely able to walk. I half carried him out to my truck, constantly looking over my shoulder, terrified the attackers would return at any moment. Once we were safely in the cab, I grabbed my phone to call 911, but there was no signal, of course, in the middle of nowhere. The injured clerk was fading in and out of consciousness in the passenger seat. I had no choice. I fired up the engine and tore out of there as fast as I could, heading for the nearest town. The whole time I kept checking my mirrors, convinced I'd see headlights gaining on us at any moment. It felt like hours, but was probably only about 20 minutes before I saw signs of civilization. As soon as I got a signal, I called 911 and explained the situation. They directed me to the nearest hospital and said police would meet us there. The rest of the night was a blur of police interviews and paramedics tending to the victim. They told me he would recover, but if I hadn't found him when I did, well, it didn't bear thinking about. As the adrenaline wore off, the full weight of what had happened hit me. I sat in the hospital waiting room, my whole body shaking. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come to just driving away. If I'd ignored that noise, if I'd let my fear take over, a man would have died. The police praised me for my actions, called me a hero, but I didn't feel like a hero. I felt lucky and terrified because I realized how fragile the boundary is between an ordinary day and unimaginable horror. It's been months since that night, but I still have nightmares about it. Every time I stop at a gas station, my heart starts racing. I'm always looking over my shoulder, wondering if danger is lurking just out of sight. I've thought about quitting trucking, finding a nice safe desk job. But then I think about that clerk, how if I hadn't been there that night, he wouldn't be alive today. And I realize that sometimes being in the right place at the right time can make all the difference. So I keep driving. But I'll never forget that night in Boise, when a routine coffee stop turned into a nightmare, and how close I came to driving away from someone who desperately needed help. It's a reminder that you never know when you might be called upon to be someone's hero, and that sometimes the scariest thing you can do is also the right thing. I don't know what happened to those robbers. The police never caught them, as far as I know. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, preying on lonely gas stations in the middle of nowhere. It's a chilling thought, but mostly I try to focus on the positive, on the life that was saved that night, on the reminder that even in our darkest moments, help can come from unexpected places, and on the knowledge that ordinary people like you and me can make a difference if we're brave enough to act when it matters most. Still, I'll never look at a deserted gas station the same way again. because now I know that behind those flickering neon lights and silent pumps, there might be someone in desperate need of help. And next time, it might not be me who stops to investigate that muffled sound coming from the back room. So if you're ever driving late at night and you see a lonely gas station in the middle of nowhere, just remember my story, and maybe think twice before you decide it's too creepy to stop, because you never know, you might be someone's only hope. As a freelance journalist, I'm used to staying in all sorts of places while on assignment. This trip was meant to be a quiet getaway to finalize a piece I'd been working on. The photos of the house online looked charming, all Southern Gothic vibes with a wraparound porch and moss-draped trees. The reviews raved about the authentic Savannah experience. I thought I'd scored the perfect writing retreat. Boy, was I wrong. The first red flag came as I was driving through the neighborhood. Instead of the picturesque historic district I was expecting, I found myself on streets lined with boarded-up houses and overgrown yards. Graffiti covered nearly every surface. I saw a group of surly-looking guys hanging out on a street corner, eyeing my car as I passed. My stomach dropped as I realized this was definitely not the area depicted in those glossy online photos. But I tried to stay optimistic. Maybe it was just this particular street. Surely the house itself would be nice. I pulled up to the address, double-checking to make sure I had the right place. The house looked okay from the outside, but it was sandwiched between two abandoned properties with boarded windows. Not exactly the charming neighborhood I'd envisioned. As I got out of the car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I had the distinct feeling of being watched. I glanced around, but didn't see anyone. Just empty houses with dark windows staring back at me. I hurried to grab my bags and let myself in, locking the door behind me. The interior was decent enough, if a bit run down. But something just felt off. I couldn't shake the creepy vibe as I walked through the rooms. I tried to settle in and unpack, but I kept finding myself peeking out the windows, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. The sun was setting, and the street outside looked even more ominous in the fading light. Around 9 p.m. I heard what sounded like footsteps on the porch. My heart racing, I crept to the window and peeked out. I caught a glimpse of someone ducking around the corner of the house. I called out, asking if anyone was there. No response. I double-checked all the locks and tried to convince myself it was just my imagination running wild. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been out there. As the night wore on, more strange noises kept me on edge. Creaks and thumps that seemed to come from inside the walls. Whispers that sounded like they were right outside my bedroom door. I barely slept, jumping at every little sound. I told myself I was being paranoid, that old houses just make weird noises. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next day, I tried to focus on my work, but found it impossible to concentrate. I kept thinking I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, only to look and find nothing there. That afternoon, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. As soon as I stepped outside, I noticed two guys across the street staring intently at the house. When they saw me, they quickly turned and walked away. My skin crawled. I hurried back inside and locked the door, my hands shaking. As night fell again, the weird occurrences escalated. Around midnight, I heard what sounded like someone trying to open the back door. The handle jiggled, then there was a scraping noise like someone trying to pick the lock. Terrified, I called 911. By the time the police arrived 20 minutes later, there was no sign of anyone. The officers looked around but said they didn't see anything suspicious. They told me to call again if I had any other problems. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, so I stayed up working on my laptop in the living room. Around 3 a.m., I heard a horrifying sound. The screech of nails on glass, like someone was trying to claw their way in through the window. I froze in terror, afraid to move or make a sound. The scratching continued for what felt like an eternity. Then silence. When dawn finally broke, I screwed up my courage to examine the window. My blood ran cold when I saw deep scratch marks gouged into the glass. That was it. I'd had enough. I quickly packed my things, not even bothering to shower or change. As I was loading up my car, a friendly-looking older woman emerged from the house next door. "Leaving so soon, dear?" she asked. "Most folks who rent that place don't even make it through one night." I stared at her in shock. "What do you mean?" She shook her head sadly. "Oh, honey, didn't they tell you? That house has been nothing but trouble for years. All kinds of break-ins and squatters. The owner can't keep tenants for more than a few days. It's why all the other houses on the block have been abandoned." I was livid. How could the host not disclose this? I immediately called him to confront him about the situation. His response chilled me to the bone. "Oh yeah, we've had some issues with intruders," he said casually, like it was no big deal. "But hey, that's just part of the authentic Savannah experience, right? Keeps things exciting." I was speechless. This guy was seriously trying to pass off potentially dangerous criminal activity as a quirky local attraction. I got in my car and got the hell out of there, not even bothering to respond. As soon as I was safely away, I contacted Airbnb to report the host and demand a refund. They were appropriately horrified and promised to investigate. It's been months since that nightmare in Savannah, but I still have trouble sleeping some nights. I keep replaying those terrifying moments in my head, imagining what could have happened if someone had actually broken in. These days, I'm hyper-vigilant about researching neighborhoods and properties before I book anywhere. I read every review with a critical eye, looking for any hint of security issues. And I always trust my gut. If something feels off, I'm out of there. I know I got lucky. Things could have ended much worse. But I'll never forget those nights of pure terror, feeling like a sitting duck just waiting for someone to break in. It was a harsh reminder that you can't always trust what you see online. Sometimes, the authentic local experience is more authentic than you bargained for. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. It all started when I decided to take a trip to Denver for a much-needed break from work. As a freelance photographer, I'm always on the go, and I was looking forward to some quiet time to recharge. I found this charming house on Airbnb that seemed perfect, cozy, affordable, and in a nice neighborhood. The host, Tom, was responsive and friendly in our messages. Everything looked great on paper. When I arrived at the house, I was immediately impressed. It was a cute little bungalow with a well-maintained yard and a welcoming front porch. Tom greeted me and gave me a quick tour of the place. The interior was just as nice as the outside. Hardwood floors, updated kitchen, comfortable living room. He showed me to the bedroom and bathroom upstairs, then handed over the keys and left me to settle in. That first evening was exactly what I needed. I ordered some takeout, got cozy on the couch, and binged a few episodes of my favorite show. As I was getting ready for bed, I noticed a door in the hallway that Tom hadn't mentioned during the tour. I assumed it was just a closet and didn't think much of it. It wasn't until the middle of the night that things started to get weird. I woke up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom and heard what sounded like shuffling noises coming from downstairs. At first, I thought maybe it was just the house settling or pipes creaking. Old houses make all kinds of strange sounds, right? But as I lay there trying to fall back asleep, the noises continued. There were distinct footsteps, then what sounded like someone dragging something across the floor. My heart started racing as I strained to listen. Was someone in the house? Had I forgotten to lock the door? I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, and crept to the top of the stairs. The noises had stopped, but now I could hear what sounded like labored breathing coming from below. I was frozen in fear, unsure whether to investigate or barricade myself in the bedroom. After a few tense minutes of silence, I heard a door shut and then nothing. I didn't sleep a wink for the rest of the night, convinced that every creak and groan was an intruder. When morning finally came, I did a thorough search of the house, but found no signs of a break-in. All the doors and windows were still locked. I messaged Tom to ask if there had been any break-ins in the neighborhood recently. He replied quickly, assuring me that it was a very safe area and he'd never had any issues. I felt a little silly for overreacting, chalking it up to being in an unfamiliar place. But the next night, it happened again. This time, the noises were even more distinct. I heard what sounded like someone coughing, then muttering to themselves. It was definitely coming from downstairs, and it didn't sound like it was coming through the walls from a neighboring house. My mind raced with possibilities. Was there a squatter living in the house? A ghost? I know that sounds ridiculous, but in the moment, it felt like a real possibility. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned on all the lights and went downstairs, my heart pounding out of my chest. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I noticed something I hadn't before. That door I'd seen earlier wasn't a closet at all. It led to a basement. The noises were definitely coming from behind that door. I stood there paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do. Should I open it? Call the police? As I deliberated, I heard shuffling on the other side of the door, like someone was right there listening to me too. Then came a soft knock from the other side. I bolted back upstairs and locked myself in the bedroom, my hands shaking as I dialed Tom's number. When he finally answered, I demanded to know what the hell was going on. There was a long pause before he sighed and said, "I guess I should have mentioned the long-term tenant." I was stunned. "What long-term tenant?" I practically shouted into the phone. Tom explained that there was a man living in the basement apartment. He'd been there for years and rarely came out during the day. Tom claimed he didn't mention it in the listing because the man was quiet and kept to himself, and the basement had its own separate entrance from the outside. I was furious. How could he not disclose something like that? I told him I was leaving immediately and wanted a full refund. He tried to assure me that the tenant was harmless, just a bit of a recluse, but I wasn't having any of it. As I was throwing my belongings into my suitcase, I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. My blood ran cold as I realized the tenant was coming up from the basement. I grabbed my keys and phone, leaving everything else behind, and ran out of the house in my pajamas. I spent the night in my car in a well-lit parking lot, too terrified to go back for my things. In the morning, I contacted Airbnb and filed a formal complaint. They were apologetic and issued a full refund, but the damage was done. It's been months since that night, but I still have nightmares about what might have happened if I'd stayed. I can't shake the image of that basement door or the sound of those footsteps coming up the stairs. Was the man really harmless, or was Tom covering for something more sinister? I've tried to rationalize it, telling myself that it was probably just an eccentric older person who valued their privacy. But why all the secrecy? Why didn't Tom tell me about him from the start? And what would have happened if I'd opened that basement door? The experience has left me with a deep-seated fear of basements and a lingering distrust of rental properties. I can't stay in a house alone anymore without thoroughly checking every nook and cranny. I've turned down job opportunities that would require me to travel and stay in unfamiliar places. Sometimes I wonder about that man in the basement. Is he still there? Are other unsuspecting guests staying in that house, unaware of what lies beneath their feet? I've thought about trying to investigate further to get some closure, but the fear always holds me back. I know this all might sound paranoid or exaggerated, but I swear every word is true. It's changed the way I see the world, made me question the safety I once took for granted. I hope sharing my story might serve as a warning to others. Always ask questions, trust your instincts, and remember that sometimes the real danger isn't what might break in, but what might already be inside. I found this cute little place on a vacation rental site just outside of Asheville, North Carolina. The photos showed a quaint log cabin nestled in the woods, with a fireplace and a hot tub on the back deck. It seemed ideal, quiet, secluded, and surrounded by nature. The host, Alan, had great reviews praising his hospitality. I booked it for a long weekend and was counting down the days until I could escape. When I arrived on Friday evening, I was immediately charmed by the cabin. It was exactly as pictured, rustic and cozy, with twinkling fairy lights strung along the porch. Alan had left the key under the mat as promised. Inside, there was a handwritten welcome note, along with a bottle of local wine. So far, so good. I spent that first evening just unwinding, soaking in the hot tub, reading by the fire, and enjoying the peaceful quiet of the forest. It felt amazing to be away from the constant beeping of monitors and the frantic pace of the hospital. I went to bed feeling more relaxed than I had in months. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Alan checking in to make sure everything was okay. I replied that it was perfect and thanked him for the wine. He seemed friendly enough, asking if I had any plans for the day. I mentioned I was thinking of going for a hike, and he suggested a nearby trail with great views. I spent most of the day exploring the trails and taking in the fall foliage. When I got back to the cabin that afternoon, I had another message from Alan asking how my hike was. I thought it was nice of him to follow up. I told him it was beautiful and that I was planning a quiet night in. That's when things started to get weird. A few hours later, he texted again, "Enjoying that glass of wine on the deck?" I froze. How did he know that? I hadn't mentioned it to him. I was indeed sitting on the back deck with a glass of wine, but there was no way he could see me from the road. The cabin was set pretty far back in the woods. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was just a lucky guess. But then another message came through. "That burgundy sweater looks cozy." My blood ran cold. I was wearing a burgundy sweater I had just changed into after my shower. There's no way he could have known that unless he was watching me somehow. Trying not to panic, I went inside and locked all the doors and windows. I told myself I was being paranoid, that there must be some explanation. Maybe the cleaning staff had mentioned what clothes I brought. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong. I barely slept that night, jumping at every little sound. In the morning, I decided to cut my trip short and leave early. As I was packing up my car, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were fresh footprints in the mud all around the cabin, including right up to the windows. Someone had definitely been creeping around, watching me. I got in my car and sped out of there as fast as I could, my heart pounding. On the drive home, I got one last message from Alan. "Sorry to see you go so soon. I was enjoying getting to know you." I felt sick. When I got home, I immediately reported the incident to the vacation rental company. They said they would investigate, but I wasn't satisfied. I have a friend who's a police officer, so I asked her to look into Alan's background. What she found chilled me to the bone. Apparently, this wasn't the first complaint against Alan. There had been several reports from other women of creepy, stalker-like behavior. He had never been charged with anything, but there was definitely a pattern. My friend thinks he probably had hidden cameras in the cabin, which is how he knew so many details about what I was doing. It's been a few months now, but I still have nightmares about being watched. I get paranoid in hotel rooms, always checking for hidden cameras. I haven't been able to bring myself to do another vacation rental. The thought of staying in a stranger's place makes me feel sick. I keep wondering what would have happened if I had stayed the full weekend. Would Alan have escalated from watching to something worse? The possibilities haunt me. I'm angry at myself for ignoring the red flags, for brushing off my instincts when things first felt off. I should have left immediately when I got that first weird text. The whole experience has made me realize how vulnerable we can be, especially as women traveling alone. I've become hyper-vigilant about my safety now. I always share my location with friends when I go anywhere new. I researched self-defense classes and bought some pepper spray to carry with me. I've tried to find out what happened with the investigation into Alan, but the rental company won't give me any details. I worry that he's still out there, preying on other unsuspecting women. I've thought about going public with my story to warn others, but part of me is still too scared. What if he retaliates somehow? Sometimes I still feel like I'm being watched, even in my own home. I'll catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, or think I hear footsteps outside my window at night. Logically, I know it's just my mind playing tricks on me, but the fear feels so real in those moments. I've been seeing a therapist to work through the trauma, and it's helping, but I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe again. I used to love traveling and exploring new places. Now, the thought of staying somewhere unfamiliar fills me with dread. I keep replaying those days in the cabin over and over, looking for signs I might have missed. Were there cameras hidden in the smoke detectors, in the vents? How long had he been watching before he started texting me? The not knowing is almost worse than what actually happened. My coworkers have noticed the change in me. I used to be so carefree and adventurous. Now I'm jumpy and anxious all the time. I've tried to explain it to a few close friends, but unless you've experienced something like this, it's hard to understand how much it messes with your sense of safety and trust. I know I need to find a way to move past this. I can't let one creepy guy ruin my love of travel forever. But right now, it still feels so raw. Every time I think about booking a trip, I remember those footprints in the mud and that sick feeling of being watched without knowing it. For now, I'm focusing on healing and rebuilding my sense of security. Maybe someday I'll feel brave enough to stay in a cabin again, but it won't be anytime soon, and you can bet I'll be doing a lot more research on the host before I ever book another vacation rental. I hope by sharing my story, I can help other women be more aware and trust their instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't ignore those red flags like I did. It's better to seem paranoid than to end up in a dangerous situation. Stay safe out there and watch out for the Allens of the world. They might seem friendly at first, but you never know what's really going on behind that screen. I had booked an Airbnb for my stay, nothing fancy, just a shared apartment to keep costs down. When I arrived, I was greeted by Kelly, my roommate for the week. She seemed nice enough at first, if a bit eccentric. She had long, wild hair and was dressed all in black. As we chatted, she casually mentioned that she was a witch. I laughed it off, assuming she was joking or just really into the whole witchy aesthetic. But over the next couple days, I started to realize Kelly wasn't kidding around. She would perform these strange rituals in the living room, chanting in some language I didn't recognize. I'd wake up to find salt circles scattered around the apartment, and she kept candles burning at all hours, even when she wasn't home. It was unsettling, but I tried to ignore it and focus on my seminar. The weirdest thing was this old trunk Kelly kept in her room. It was massive and covered in strange symbols. I caught glimpses of it when her door was open, and it gave me the creeps. Kelly was super protective of it and would get agitated if I even glanced in that direction. On the third night, things took a seriously bizarre turn. I got back late from a networking event to find the apartment in total disarray. Furniture was overturned, papers were scattered everywhere, and Kelly was nowhere to be found. At first I thought we'd been robbed, but nothing seemed to be missing. Just Kelly. The strangest part? All of Kelly's belongings were still there. Her clothes, her phone, even that creepy trunk. It was like she had just vanished into thin air. I was seriously freaked out at this point. I called the Airbnb host in a panic, asking if she knew where Kelly might have gone. But her response chilled me to the bone. She had no idea who Kelly was. According to her, I was the only guest booked for that week. There was no record of anyone else staying there. My mind was reeling. Had I imagined Kelly? Was I going crazy? But no, her stuff was still there. She had to be real, right? Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate Kelly's room. I know I shouldn't have, but I was desperate for answers. The moment I stepped inside, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kelly's clothes were strewn about, and there were half-burned candles everywhere. And in the center of it all was that massive trunk. My hands were shaking as I approached it. Part of me was screaming to just leave, to get out of there and never look back. But I had to know. I had to understand what the hell was going on. I took a deep breath and opened the trunk. The musty smell hit me immediately, along with a wave of dread. Inside were dozens of strange objects, crystals, dried herbs, animal bones, and vials filled with God knows what. But what really caught my eye were the books. They were old, really old, with cracked leather bindings, and they were written in some kind of code or language I'd never seen before. The pages were filled with diagrams and symbols that made my skin crawl. I couldn't understand a word, but I got the distinct feeling that these weren't the kind of books you'd find at Barnes & Noble. As I flipped through one of the books, a piece of paper fell out. It was a photo, old and faded. My blood ran cold when I saw what it depicted. It was Kelly, or someone who looked exactly like her, standing in front of a building. But the clothing and the car in the background, it looked like it was from the 1920s or 30s. That was it. I couldn't take any more. I slammed the trunk shut and ran out of the room, my heart pounding. I grabbed my suitcase and got the hell out of there, leaving everything else behind. I didn't care about the seminar anymore. I just needed to get away. I spent the rest of the night in a cheap motel, jumping at every sound. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When morning finally came, I booked the first flight home. It's been months now, and I still can't explain what happened in that apartment. Who was Kelly, really? Where did she go? And how could she have been in that old photograph? I've tried researching, looking for any information about witches in Austin or mysterious disappearances, but I've come up empty. Sometimes I wonder if I dreamed the whole thing, but then I remember the chill in Kelly's room, the symbols on that trunk, and the inexplicable photo. And I know it was real, too real. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened during those few days in Austin. Part of me doesn't want to, but I can't stop thinking about it, about Kelly. And I can't shake the feeling that somehow, somewhere, she's still out there, watching, waiting. For what? I don't know, and I hope I never find out. Back in September, I decided to rent a cabin in the Adirondacks. As a freelance journalist, I was working on a big story and needed some peace and quiet to focus. The cabin seemed perfect, nestled in the woods, miles from the nearest neighbor. I packed up my laptop and enough supplies for a week, excited for the solitude and the chance to immerse myself in my work. The first couple of days were great. I got into a rhythm, waking up early to the sound of birds chirping, making coffee, and settling in at my laptop. The words flowed easily in the tranquil setting. In the evenings, I'd sit out on the small deck, watching the sun set behind the trees and listening to the forest come alive with nighttime sounds. It was on the third night that things started to feel off. I was working late, the glow of my laptop the only light in the dark cabin. Suddenly, the Wi-Fi cut out. Annoyed, I got up to check the router. As I fiddled with it, I realized the landline phone was dead too. At first, I chalked it up to some kind of power surge or technical glitch, but a nagging feeling in my gut told me something wasn't right. I tried using my cell phone, but of course there was no service out here. That's why I'd made sure the cabin had a landline in the first place. I told myself not to panic. It was probably nothing. But I found myself double-checking that the doors were locked before I went to bed that night. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to get the phone and internet working again. I needed to contact my editor about my deadline. As I stepped out onto the deck, squinting in the early morning light, my blood ran cold. There, in the dirt right below the deck, were several clear footprints. They weren't my own. These were larger, and the tread pattern was different from my hiking boots. Someone had been walking around the cabin while I slept. My hands shaking, I examined the phone line where it connected to the outside of the cabin. My stomach dropped when I saw that it had been cleanly cut. This wasn't an accident or a tech issue. Someone had deliberately severed my connection to the outside world. I ran back inside, slamming and locking the door behind me. My mind was racing. Should I try to leave? But what if they were still out there, waiting? I had no way to call for help. I was truly alone. I spent the day in a state of hypervigilance, jumping at every creak and rustle from outside. As night fell, my nerves were frayed to the breaking point. I huddled in the bedroom, a kitchen knife clutched in my trembling hands. Around midnight it started, soft at first, then louder. Knocking. Someone was outside, knocking on the walls of the cabin. It moved around the perimeter, sometimes stopping for long moments before starting again. I bit my lip to keep from screaming, tears streaming down my face. The knocking continued for what felt like hours. Sometimes it would stop for 10 or 15 minutes, lulling me into thinking it was over, before starting again with renewed intensity. I was certain that at any moment I'd hear glass breaking or the door splintering as they forced their way in. But they never did. As the first pale light of dawn broke through the windows, the knocking ceased. I waited, barely breathing, for another hour before I worked up the courage to peer outside. There was no sign of anyone. I threw my belongings into my car and sped out of there, not even bothering to clean up or check out properly. I drove straight to the local police station, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. The officer I spoke to was sympathetic, but not particularly helpful. With no physical evidence beyond the cut phone line and my own account, there wasn't much they could do. He speculated that it might have been local teens playing a prank, or possibly bears, though that didn't explain the cut line. It was a technician from the phone company who finally offered some insight when he came to repair the line a few days later. He'd seen similar cases before. Apparently, there were criminals who targeted isolated cabins, cutting phone lines to test if anyone was there and how long it would take for someone to notice and call for repairs. If no one showed up for a while, they knew the cabin was empty and ripe for burglary or worse. The thought makes me sick. Had I been some kind of test subject? Were they gauging my reactions, seeing how I'd respond to being cut off and terrorized? It's been months now, and I still haven't fully processed what happened. I find myself doubting my own memories sometimes. Was it really as bad as I remember? Did I imagine or exaggerate things in my fear? But then I'll catch a glimpse of those muddy hiking boots I wore that week, tucked away in my closet, and it all comes rushing back. The footprints that weren't mine, the cut phone line, the endless, maddening knocking in the dark. I haven't been back to the Adirondacks. I'm not sure I'll ever be able to stay in a remote cabin again. These days, I stick to crowded cities where I can always hear the comforting sounds of other people nearby. I wanted solitude, but I learned the hard way that being truly alone can be dangerous. Now I find myself longing for the very things I once tried to escape: the noise of traffic, the chatter of neighbors, the constant connectivity of modern life. Because in the end, those things don't just represent annoyances. They represent safety. They represent the comforting knowledge that help is just a shout or a phone call away. I still work as a freelance journalist, but I've developed new habits. I always make sure someone knows exactly where I am. I have multiple backup methods of communication. I'm hyper-aware of my surroundings, especially at night. Sometimes I wonder about those knocks. Were they trying to scare me into fleeing the cabin so they could rob it? Were they taunting me? Or was it all some sick game, a way to torment a lone woman for their own twisted enjoyment? I'll probably never know the truth. But one thing's for certain. I'll never take my safety and connection to others for granted again. Because now I know firsthand how quickly isolation can turn from peaceful to terrifying, and how vulnerable we truly are when we're cut off from the world. So if you're reading this and considering a solo trip to some remote location, please be careful. Take precautions. Let people know where you'll be. And maybe think twice about how much solitude you really need. Because sometimes the very thing we're seeking can become a trap, one that's all too easy to stumble into and much harder to escape. It started as a typical human interest piece. My editor wanted a story on modern-day hermits living off the grid in the Catskills. Sounded straightforward enough. I packed up my gear and made the drive upstate, looking forward to a few days in the scenic mountains. I checked into a small inn in one of those quaint little towns that dot the region, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business. I figured it would be a good spot to get some local intel before heading deeper into the woods. My first day was spent chatting up the locals at the town diner. Most folks were friendly enough, if a bit wary of outsiders. I got a few leads on some reclusive types living up in the hills, but nothing too concrete. That's when I met Dennis. He was sitting alone in a corner booth, twitchy and paranoid looking. Something about him screamed hermit to me. So I decided to strike up a conversation. Big mistake. Dennis was off, way off. His eyes darted around constantly, like he was afraid someone was after him. When I introduced myself and explained why I was in town, he got really agitated. "You shouldn't be poking around up here," he hissed. "There are things in these woods, things you don't want to know about." I tried to play it cool, thinking this was just the ravings of some mountain weirdo. I asked if he'd be willing to do an interview for my story. That's when things got weird. Dennis leaned in close, his breath reeking of whiskey and tobacco. "You want a story? I'll give you a story, but you won't like it, and they won't like me telling it." Before I could ask who they were, Dennis bolted from the diner. I watched him disappear down an alley, feeling unsettled, but chalking it up to the ramblings of a disturbed man. I spent the rest of the day following up on other leads, but kept thinking about my strange encounter with Dennis. That night, back at the inn, I found a crumpled note shoved under my door. "Get out now before it's too late." The handwriting was shaky, almost frantic. My first thought was that Dennis had followed me back to the inn. I debated calling the police, but what would I even say? That some random guy at a diner scared me with cryptic warnings? I decided to lock my door and try to get some sleep. Big mistake number 2. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a scratching sound. At first I thought it was just tree branches against the window, but as I became more alert, I realized it was coming from my door. Long, slow scratches, like fingernails or claws, dragging across the wood. My blood ran cold. I lay there paralyzed, straining to hear any other sounds. The scratching continued for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. Then, silence. When morning finally came, I practically ran to the door. There, carved into the wood, were 3 deep gashes. They looked far too big to have been made by a person. I should have left right then and there, but my journalistic curiosity got the better of me. I convinced myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was just some kids playing a prank. I spent that day hiking through the woods, hoping to find some of the off-grid folks I'd come to interview. The whole time, I felt like I was being watched. Every snapping twig made me jump. As the sun started to set, I realized I'd wandered farther than I'd intended. The trees all looked the same in the fading light. I pulled out my phone, but of course there was no signal this deep in the forest. That's when I saw it, a dark figure just at the edge of my vision. When I turned to look directly at it, there was nothing there. But every time I looked away, I could swear I saw movement in my peripheral vision. My heart was pounding as I tried to retrace my steps. I kept seeing flashes of something moving through the trees, always just out of sight. Was it a person, an animal, or something else entirely? I finally found my way back to a trail I recognized and practically sprinted back to town. By the time I reached the inn, I was a sweaty, panicked mess. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every sound had me on edge. Around midnight, I heard it, a low, gurgling laugh coming from right outside my window. It was unlike any sound I'd ever heard before. Not quite human, but not quite animal either. I buried my head under the pillow, praying for it to stop. Then came the tapping, slow, deliberate taps on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I wanted to look, to confront whatever was out there, but I was paralyzed with fear. The tapping continued for hours, sometimes stopping for a few minutes before starting up again. When dawn finally broke, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept at all. My hands shook as I packed my bags, determined to get the hell out of there. As I was checking out, the girl at the front desk gave me a concerned look. "You okay, hun?" You look like you've seen a ghost." I mumbled something about not sleeping well and headed for my car. As I was throwing my bags in the trunk, I heard someone call out to me. It was a waitress from the diner jogging across the parking lot. "Hey, you're that reporter, right? The one asking about hermits?" I nodded, not really in the mood to chat. She looked around nervously before continuing. "Listen, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but there's this guy who lives up in the hills, real dangerous type. He doesn't like outsiders poking around." My blood ran cold. "Dennis?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nah, Dennis is harmless. Just a bit touched in the head, you know. I'm talking about someone else, someone worse. He's been known to terrorize campers and hikers, make them think they're going crazy." I thought about the scratches, the laughter, the tapping. "Why hasn't anyone reported him to the police?" The waitress shrugged. "People have tried, but there's never any evidence. And honestly, some folks around here think he might not be human." I thanked her for the information and got in my car, my hands shaking as I turned the key. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in my rearview mirror. There, at the edge of the woods, I saw a dark figure watching me. For just a second, I could have sworn its eyes glowed red in the morning light. Then I blinked, and it was gone. I don't know what happened to me in those Catskill Mountains. Was it all an elaborate hoax? A prank gone too far? Or was there really something sinister lurking in those woods? All I know is that I'll never go back there again. And if you're ever in that part of the Catskills, do yourself a favor. Stick to the well-traveled paths. And whatever you do, don't go looking for hermits. You might just find one. It was supposed to be a routine trip, tracking brown bear populations in the remote wilderness. I'd been out for days, hiking through dense forests and rugged terrain. The weather had been deteriorating all afternoon, dark clouds rolling in ominously. As the wind picked up and rain started pelting down, I knew I needed to find shelter fast. That's when I spotted it through the trees. An old wooden cabin, weathered and overgrown. I breathed a sigh of relief as I hurried towards it. The door creaked open easily, and I gratefully stepped inside out of the storm. The interior was musty and dim. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs hung in the corners. It was clear no one had been here in years. Still, it was dry and offered protection from the elements. I set down my pack and started to make myself comfortable. As I explored the single-room cabin, something caught my eye on a rickety desk in the corner. A notebook, its cover stained and warped with age. Curious, I picked it up and started flipping through the pages. What I saw made my blood run cold. The notebook was filled with meticulous, obsessive notes about tracking people through the wilderness. Detailed descriptions of individuals, their appearance, habits, routines, maps marked with specific locations and times, chilling phrases like "target acquired" and "termination successful" scrawled in the margins. My hands shook as I turned page after page. This wasn't the work of a park ranger or Forest Service employee. This was something far more sinister. The psychotic ramblings of a predator stalking human prey. I slammed the notebook shut, my mind reeling. I had to get out of there immediately. Storm or no storm, I couldn't stay in this place another minute. I grabbed my pack and bolted for the door, fumbling with the handle in my panic. As I burst outside into the rain, movement in the trees caught my eye. There, partially obscured by the foliage, stood a figure. Tall and unnaturally still, it seemed to meld with the shadows, but I could feel its gaze locked onto me, watching. Terror seized me. I ran blindly into the forest, branches whipping my face as I crashed through the underbrush. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but pure adrenaline kept me going. I didn't stop until I reached my campsite, collapsing into my tent in exhaustion. Sleep was impossible that night. Every snapping twig or rustle of leaves had me on high alert. As soon as dawn broke, I packed up camp and headed for the ranger station miles away. The two rangers on duty listened intently as I recounted my horrifying experience, growing more concerned with each detail. They immediately sent out a team to investigate the cabin. But when they returned hours later, their expressions were puzzled. The cabin had been completely empty. No furniture, no desk, no incriminating notebook. Not a single trace of what I'd seen remained. I insisted it had been there, described the interior in vivid detail. But they just exchanged glances, clearly doubting my story. "Ma'am, that cabin's been abandoned for decades," one ranger said gently. "We check it periodically. There's never been anything inside." I felt sick. Had I imagined it all? Was the isolation getting to me? But it had felt so real, so viscerally terrifying. The notebook, the watching figure, it couldn't have been a hallucination. They offered to escort me back to town, but I declined. I needed to finish my research. But as I headed back into the wilderness, doubt and fear gnawed at me. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every sound put me on edge. I constantly felt watched, even when I logically knew I was alone. Sleep became elusive as nightmares plagued me. I cut my trip short, unable to shake the feeling of dread that now permeated the forest. But even back in civilization, I couldn't escape what had happened. For months afterward, I was haunted by unexplained occurrences. Footsteps outside my apartment at night. My security camera footage erased. That same notebook appearing on my desk, only to vanish when I looked away. I've since left my wildlife research career behind. The solitude of the wilderness that I once loved now fills me with paralyzing fear. I've moved to a bustling city, surrounding myself with people and noise. But I know what's out there, watching, waiting. The horror I encountered in those Alaskan woods has forever changed me, and I can't shake the feeling that one day it will find me again. I've never spoken publicly about what happened until now. Part of me still doubts my own sanity, wondering if it was all in my head. But I know what I saw, what I felt. The terror was real, so I'm sharing my story as a warning. Be cautious in the wilderness. Trust your instincts. And if you ever come across an abandoned cabin in Kodiak, run. Don't look back, because there are predators out there, and sometimes they hunt more than just animals. I still have nightmares about that day, the musty cabin, the chilling notebook, that shadowy figure watching me from the trees. Even now, years later, I break out in a cold sweat remembering it. There are times I want to convince myself it was all a stress-induced hallucination, but deep down, I know the truth. Something evil lurks in those Alaskan woods, something that defies explanation. I've done extensive research since then, looking for similar encounters or missing persons cases in the area. While I haven't found anything conclusive, there are whispered stories. Hikers who vanished without a trace. Strange sightings of a tall, shadowy figure. Could they all be connected to what I experienced? I may never know for certain, but I can't shake the feeling that I narrowly escaped something truly sinister that day. I still have so many unanswered questions. Who wrote that notebook? How did it and all traces of habitation vanish from the cabin? Was the figure I saw in the woods the author, or something else entirely? The not knowing is almost worse than the experience itself. My mind conjures up horrific possibilities in the dark of night. I've considered going back, trying to find answers. But the thought of returning to those woods fills me with paralyzing dread. Whatever is out there, I don't think I could face it again. So I live with the uncertainty, the lingering fear. I've learned to cope, to push the memories to the back of my mind most days, but I know I'll never fully recover from what happened. If you're reading this and planning a trip to the Alaskan wilderness, please be careful. Stay alert. Trust your gut if something feels off. And if you come across an old cabin that seems too good to be true in a storm, keep walking. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some horrors are better left in the shadows. I learned that lesson the hard way. I only hope my experience can help keep others safe from whatever malevolent force I encountered that day in Kodiak. The scars may have faded, but the fear remains. And I know that somewhere out there, in those vast Alaskan forests, something is still watching, waiting, hunting. I just pray it never finds me again. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway. Just me, the mountains, and blessed solitude after years of the hectic pace of emergency response work. I'd found a rustic little cabin for rent, miles from the nearest town, nestled in a clearing surrounded by dense forest. As I drove up the winding dirt road, I felt my stress melting away. The fall foliage was stunning, painting the mountainsides in vivid reds and golds. The cabin itself was simple but cozy, just one main room with a small kitchenette, a fireplace, and a loft bedroom area. Big picture windows looked out on the woods and mountains beyond. It was exactly what I needed to decompress and reflect on this new chapter of my life. That first afternoon I went for a hike to stretch my legs after the long drive. The crisp autumn air felt invigorating as I trekked along overgrown trails, savoring the quiet broken only by birdsong and the crunch of leaves underfoot. I returned to the cabin as dusk was falling, built a fire, and settled in with a book and a glass of whiskey. It wasn't until late that night that the first unsettling thing happened. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard it, a faint but distinct tapping sound coming from one of the windows downstairs. At first, I dismissed it as a branch in the wind, but as I listened, the rhythm seemed too deliberate, almost like knuckles gently rapping on glass. My old instincts kicked in, and I went to investigate, moving quietly down the stairs. The tapping stopped as soon as I reached the main room. I did a thorough check of all the windows and the perimeter of the cabin, but found nothing amiss. Probably just my imagination getting the better of me in an unfamiliar place, I told myself. I managed to get back to sleep, but woke early the next morning with a vague sense of unease. As I made coffee, I noticed something odd outside, a set of footprints in the dewy grass circling the cabin. They weren't my boots and didn't match any animal tracks I recognized. The prints simply appeared out of the tree line, made a complete circuit of the building, then vanished back into the woods. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the cabin owner had come by to check on things and I'd slept through it. Or it could be a curious hiker who'd wandered by. Still, I made sure to lock all the doors and windows before heading out for another hike. I spent most of the day on the trails, pushing myself hard to work off my nervous energy. The beautiful scenery and physical exertion helped calm my mind. By the time I got back to the cabin that evening, I'd almost convinced myself there was nothing to worry about. But as night fell, the feeling of being watched crept over me. I kept glancing out the windows, unable to shake the sensation of eyes on me. Around midnight, I saw it, a human figure, standing motionless at the edge of the clearing, half hidden behind a tree. Even in the dim moonlight, I could tell it was unnaturally tall and thin. I blinked, and it was gone. Cursing my overactive imagination, I decided to turn in early. Sleep didn't come easily, though. Every creak of the cabin settling made me start. Finally, I drifted off into an uneasy doze. A sharp tapping jolted me awake sometime in the early hours. My heart racing, I lay frozen in bed, straining to listen. There it was again, that same deliberate rhythm on the glass. But this time, it was coming from the small window right next to the loft bed. Slowly, hardly daring to breathe, I turned my head toward the sound. What I saw in that moment will haunt me for the rest of my days. Pressed against the glass was a face, pale, almost glowing in the darkness. The features were distorted, elongated, with sunken black eyes that seemed to stare right through me. The mouth was open in a silent scream. I recoiled in terror, nearly falling out of the bed in my haste to get away. By the time I fumbled for the lights, the face was gone. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner of the main room, jumping at every sound. As soon as dawn broke, I threw my belongings in the car and got the hell out of there. I called the cabin's owner once I was safely back in cell range. To my frustration, he laughed off my experience, saying I must have seen a raccoon or maybe had too much to drink. It's been weeks now, and I still can't shake the feeling of violation, of having my privacy and sense of safety so utterly shattered. I keep replaying those events in my mind, second-guessing what I saw. But deep down, I know it was real. Something was out there in those mountains, watching me, toying with me. And the truly terrifying part is not knowing why, or if it's still out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting visitor. I've tried to put it behind me and move on with my retirement, but I find myself growing paranoid, checking locks obsessively and avoiding windows at night. The trauma of what I experienced has left deeper scars than any fire I fought in my career. I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe again, especially in isolated places. Sometimes I wonder if I should have stayed and tried to get evidence to prove what happened. But in that moment, blind panic took over, and all I could think about was escaping. Part of me is glad I'll never know for certain what was out there. The other part of me fears that not knowing makes it worse, that my mind will keep conjuring up increasingly terrifying possibilities. I've started seeing a therapist to try and process the experience. She suggested it could have been a stress-induced hallucination, my mind rebelling against the sudden quiet of retirement after years of high-intensity work. I want to believe that explanation, but it doesn't account for the footprints or the tapping that seem to come from multiple locations. The rational part of my brain keeps searching for logical explanations. Maybe it was an elaborate prank by local teenagers, or some kind of bizarre wild animal behavior I'd never encountered before. But none of those theories quite fit all the pieces of what I experienced. I've done some research into the folklore and history of the Blue Ridge Mountains since then. There are old stories of strange creatures in those forests, skinwalkers, wendigos, and other supernatural beings. I used to scoff at that kind of thing, but now I'm not so sure. Whatever was out there felt more malevolent than any natural predator. I've thought about reporting it to the local authorities, but I know how it would sound. A retiree alone in the woods, spooked by shadows and noises. They'd probably assume I was drunk or on drugs. And without any real evidence, what could they do anyway? So I'm left with this unresolved terror, this lingering sense of vulnerability. I find myself avoiding wooded areas now, uncomfortable with anything blocking my sight lines. Nighttime is the worst. Every shadow seems to hold menace, Every unexpected sound sends my heart racing. I keep asking myself what it wanted. Why didn't it attack outright if that was its intention? The slow build-up of dread, the sense of being toyed with. It felt almost calculating, like something intelligent was behind it all, taking pleasure in my fear. Some nights I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear that tapping sound again. I have to do a full sweep of my house before I can calm down. I've even installed security cameras, though I'm not sure if catching something on video would make me feel better or worse. I know I need to find a way to move past this, to reclaim my sense of safety and peace. But every time I close my eyes, I see that pale face pressed against the glass, those empty black eyes boring into me. I don't know if I'll ever be able to unsee it, or to shake the feeling that somehow, somewhere, it's still watching me. For now, all I can do is try to rebuild my life one day at a time and hope that eventually the memory will fade. But a part of me will always be on guard, always wondering what's lurking just beyond the edge of the light. Because now I know there are things out there in the darkness, things that defy explanation, and sometimes they come tapping at your window in the dead of night. I never thought it would happen to me. You hear about home invasions on the news, but you always think that could never happen here. Well, I'm here to tell you it can happen anywhere, even in a supposedly safe neighborhood in Phoenix. It was just past midnight, and I was up late working on some business proposals in my home office. I live alone in a 2-story house in a quiet suburban area. Nothing out of the ordinary ever happens here. At least, that's what I used to think. I had just gotten up to grab a late-night snack when I heard the distinct chime of my security system. My heart immediately started racing. I froze in place, straining my ears to listen. Maybe it was just a false alarm. But then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps downstairs. Panic gripped me as the realization hit. Someone was in my house. I quickly but quietly made my way to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher asked. I tried to keep my voice steady as I whispered, there's someone in my house. I need help. I gave them my address, and they assured me officers were on the way. But those next few minutes felt like an eternity. I could hear the intruders moving around downstairs, opening drawers and cabinets. What if they came upstairs? What if they tried to break down my bedroom door? I retrieved the handgun I keep in my nightstand for protection. I've never had to use it before and prayed I wouldn't have to now. But if those guys tried to come in, I was prepared to defend myself. My entire body was trembling as I crouched in the corner, gun trained on the door. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. I tried to control my breathing, worried they might hear me. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash from downstairs, followed by shouting, "Police! Don't move!" My body sagged with relief. Help had arrived. There was a commotion as the intruders apparently tried to flee. I heard more shouting and what sounded like a brief struggle, then silence. A few minutes later, there was a knock at my bedroom door. "Sir, this is the police. You can come out now. It's safe." I slowly opened the door, still gripping my gun. 2 officers stood there, concern evident on their faces. "Are you all right?" one of them asked. I nodded, unable to speak as the adrenaline began to wear off. They gently took the gun from my hands and led me downstairs. In my living room, 2 men were handcuffed and seated on the floor. They glared at me as I walked by. I averted my eyes, unable to look at the people who had violated the sanctity of my home. The officers explained that they had caught the men red-handed. Apparently, they had been watching my house and thought it was empty since my car wasn't in the driveway. I had parked in the garage earlier that day. As I gave my statement, I couldn't stop shaking. The reality of what had just happened was starting to sink in. These men had broken into my home, my safe space. If I hadn't been up late working, who knows what might have happened. The next few hours were a blur of police reports and crime scene technicians dusting for fingerprints. By the time they all left, the sun was starting to rise. I stood in my living room, surveying the damage. Drawers had been emptied, furniture overturned, but the physical mess paled in comparison to the emotional toll. I couldn't bring myself to go to sleep. Every little noise made me jump. I kept checking and rechecking that all the doors and windows were locked. Over the next few days, I threw myself into upgrading my home security. I installed more cameras, reinforced the doors, and added window sensors. But despite all the extra precautions, I still didn't feel safe. For weeks afterwards, I struggled to sleep through the night. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I heard someone in the house. During the day, I was constantly on edge, startling at every unexpected sound. It's been months now, and while things have gotten better, I don't think I'll ever feel completely secure in my own home again. That sense of safety and peace was shattered that night. I find myself being hyper-vigilant everywhere I go now. In stores, at restaurants, even just walking down the street, I'm always scanning my surroundings for potential threats. It's exhausting, but I can't seem to turn it off. Sometimes I think about moving, starting fresh somewhere new. But deep down I know the fear would follow me. It's not about the specific house or neighborhood anymore. It's the realization that nowhere is truly safe. I've started seeing a therapist to work through the trauma. She says what I'm experiencing is normal after such a frightening ordeal. But knowing it's normal doesn't make it any easier to deal with. One of the hardest parts has been the feeling of violation. Those men came into my personal space, touched my belongings, invaded my privacy. Even though nothing was actually stolen, I felt like so much had been taken from me. My peace of mind, my sense of security. I've had to replace a lot of things in my house. Not because they were damaged or stolen, but because I couldn't stand to look at or touch items I knew the intruders had handled. It felt like they were tainted somehow. Friends and family have been supportive, but I can tell they don't really understand. They say things like, "At least you're okay," or "It could have been worse." And while I know they mean well, those platitudes don't erase the trauma of that night. I find myself being much more cautious now, both at home and out in the world. I'm hesitant to tell people I live alone. I vary my routines so I'm less predictable. I'm much more aware of my surroundings at all times. There are still nights when every little sound jolts me awake. The house settling, a car driving by, the wind rustling the trees outside. They all send my heart racing. I lie there in the dark, straining to listen for any signs of an intruder. I've thought about getting a dog for company and added security. But part of me worries about being responsible for another life when I still struggle to feel safe myself. The legal process has been another source of stress. Having to recount that night over and over to lawyers and in court has forced me to relive the terror repeatedly. Seeing those men again, even in a courtroom setting, makes my skin crawl. I know I should feel relieved that they were caught and are facing consequences. But mostly, I just feel angry. Angry that they chose my home. Angry that they've affected my life so profoundly. Angry that I'm still dealing with the fallout months later. Some days are better than others. There are times when I almost feel normal again, like my old self. But then something will trigger a memory or a flash of fear, and I'm right back in that moment of terror. I'm trying to take back control of my life, to not let this experience define me. But it's a daily struggle. Every time I walk into my house, there's a split second where I tense up, half expecting to find someone inside. I know rationally that the odds of it happening again are slim, but fear isn't rational, and the fear that gripped me that night has seeped into every aspect of my life. I'm sharing my story as a warning to others. Don't take your safety for granted. Be aware, be prepared, but try not to let fear control your life the way it has mine. I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever fully recover, if I'll ever feel truly safe again. For now, all I can do is take it one day at a time and hope that eventually the fear will fade. But deep down, I know I'll never forget that night when the sanctity of my home was shattered, leaving me forever changed. It started on Friday evening. I was home alone, working on my thesis at the kitchen table. The house felt eerily quiet without my parents around. Around 8 p.m. the phone rang. I answered, but there was only silence on the other end. I figured it was just a wrong number and hung up. A few minutes later, it rang again. This time, I heard faint breathing before the line went dead. My heart started racing a bit, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Probably just some kids playing pranks. I tried to focus back on my work, but I kept glancing at the phone. When it rang a third time about 20 minutes later, I hesitated before picking up. A raspy voice whispered, "I can see you," before hanging up. I dropped the phone like it was on fire. Chills ran down my spine as I looked around wildly, suddenly feeling exposed. I ran to check that all the doors and windows were locked. As I peered out the living room window, my blood ran cold. There was a figure standing under the streetlight across the road, perfectly still, staring directly at my house. They were wearing some kind of mask that obscured their face. I quickly closed the curtains and backed away, my hands shaking. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a coincidence, right? Maybe just someone waiting for a ride. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong. I tried calling my parents, but it went straight to voicemail. They were probably on a plane. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? That I got some weird phone calls and saw someone outside. They'd probably think I was overreacting. I decided to try and distract myself by watching TV in the living room, but I couldn't focus on anything. My eyes kept darting to the windows, half expecting to see a face pressed against the glass. Every little creak or sound made me jump. Around 11 p.m., I worked up the courage to peek out the window again. The figure was gone, but that almost made it worse. Where had they gone? Were they still out there, hiding and watching? I was exhausted but too scared to sleep. I curled up on the couch with all the lights on, clutching my phone. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I must have dozed off. I woke with a start around 6 a.m. Sunlight was starting to filter through the curtains. For a moment, I felt relieved. Surely nothing bad could happen in the daylight. Then I noticed something on the coffee table that made my blood run cold. There was a manila envelope that definitely hadn't been there the night before. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside were dozens of photos of me. Me walking to class, me getting coffee with friends, me working at my desk by the window, all taken without my knowledge over what looked like weeks or months. The most recent ones were from just yesterday. Me sitting at the kitchen table when the phone calls started. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. How long had I been watched? How did these get inside the house? In a panic, I started throwing some clothes and essentials in a bag. I had to get out of there. As I headed for the front door, the phone rang again. Against my better judgment, I answered. The same raspy voice whispered, "Leaving so soon? Don't worry. I'll find you wherever you go." I dropped the phone and ran out of the house, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. I got in my car and just started driving, no destination in mind. I was shaking so bad I could barely hold the steering wheel. I ended up at a friend's apartment across town. When I tried to explain what happened, I broke down sobbing. She insisted on calling the police. They took a report, but seemed skeptical. There was no sign of forced entry, and the photos alone weren't enough evidence of a crime. They said they'd look into it, but I could tell they weren't taking it seriously. It's been a few days now. I'm still staying with my friend, too terrified to go back to that house. My parents cut their trip short and came home early. They're talking about selling the house and moving. Part of me feels guilty for uprooting their lives, but I know I can never feel safe there again. I keep replaying everything in my mind, wondering if there were warning signs I missed. How long was I being watched before that night? Who would do this and why? I'm jumping at every shadow, flinching at every phone ring. I can't shake the feeling of being watched, even when I'm alone in a locked room. The police haven't found anything. No fingerprints, no evidence of who might have done this. Part of me wonders if I imagined it all. But then I look at those photos, and the terror comes flooding back. I don't know how to move on from this. I'm seeing a therapist, but I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe again. I'm thinking about moving far away, maybe even changing my name. But that voice on the phone haunts me. I'll find you wherever you go. I'm sharing this as a warning. Please, always be aware of your surroundings. Trust your instincts if something feels off. And never ever assume you're truly alone, because you never know who might be watching from the shadows. That night started off normal enough. I arrived at the station around 11:30 p.m., grabbed some coffee from the break room, and settled into the studio to prep for my show. As the clock struck midnight, I went live, playing my usual mix of mellow indie rock and taking a few requests here and there. Around 2 a.m., things started to get weird. I got a call that was nothing but static and strange crackling noises. I figured it was just a bad connection, so I politely ended the call and moved on. But then it happened again, and again. Each time, the static seemed to get louder and more intense. It was starting to freak me out a little, but I tried to brush it off. Then, at about 3:15 a.m., I got a call that made my blood run cold. When I answered, there was silence for a few seconds. Then a low, distorted voice came through. "Hello, Matt. Enjoying your show tonight?" I hesitated, caught off guard by the caller knowing my name. Yeah, thanks for listening. Did you have a song request?" The voice chuckled, a chilling sound that made the hairs on my neck stand up. "Oh no, Matt. I'm not here for music. I'm here for you." My heart started racing. "I'm sorry. Who is this?" "You don't need to know my name, but I know plenty about you, Matt. I know you spilled coffee on your shirt earlier. I know you just dropped your pen under the desk." I froze. How could they possibly know that? I glanced around the studio, suddenly feeling very exposed despite being alone in the building. "Look, I don't know who you are or what you want, but this isn't funny," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, I'm not trying to be funny, Matt. I'm trying to get your attention, and now that I have it, why don't you look out your window?" My blood turned to ice. Slowly, I swiveled in my chair to face the large window that looked out onto the station's parking lot. At first, I didn't see anything in the darkness. Then, a figure stepped into view under the lone streetlight. They were wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over their face, standing perfectly still and facing directly at me. In their hand was a cell phone held up to their ear. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stared in horror as the figure raised their other hand and waved slowly at me. The voice on the phone spoke again. "Do you see me now, Matt? Do you understand that I'm real?" I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I spun back to my computer, frantically pulling up the station's security camera feed. There they were, the hooded figure, still standing in the same spot, still staring at the studio window. I didn't know what to do. I was alone in the building, and my cell phone was in my locker down the hall. The studio phone started ringing again, but I was too terrified to answer it. I just sat there, frozen, watching the figure on the security feed. For what felt like hours, but was probably only about 20 minutes, the stranger stood there, occasionally raising the phone to their ear as if speaking. The studio phone would ring, stop, then ring again. I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to look away from the cameras but too scared to do anything else. Then, suddenly, the figure turned and walked out of view of the cameras. I frantically switched between feeds, trying to spot them, but they had vanished into the night. The studio phone rang one last time. With trembling hands, I answered it. The distorted voice spoke, "Good night, Matt. Sleep tight. I'll be seeing you again soon." The line went dead. I don't remember much after that. I must have gone into autopilot, finishing my shift somehow. When the morning crew arrived at 6 a.m., they found me huddled in the corner of the studio, pale and shaking. I tried to explain what happened, but it all sounded so insane. The station manager reviewed the security footage, but there was no sign of the hooded figure. The phone logs showed no incoming calls during my shift. They chalked it up to me falling asleep and having a vivid nightmare. But I know what I saw, what I heard. It was real, and it changed me. I quit the overnight shift that day and haven't worked past sunset since. I'm jumpy, paranoid, always looking over my shoulder. Every time my phone rings, my heart stops for a moment. I don't know who that person was or what they wanted. I don't know how they knew those things about me or how they seemed to disappear into thin air. All I know is that I'll never forget that night, and I'll never shake the feeling that somewhere out there, someone is watching me, waiting to make contact again. So that's my story. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I needed to share it. If you're out there working late nights alone, please be careful. You never know who might be listening, who might be watching. And if you ever get a call full of static, just hang up. Trust me, you don't want to know what comes next. I still remember the day Todd moved in next door like it was yesterday. It was a sunny Saturday morning in April, and I was out mowing the lawn when I saw the moving truck pull up. Being the friendly neighbor I am, I waved and walked over to introduce myself. That's when I met Todd for the first time, a tall, lanky guy with messy brown hair and an easy smile. He seemed nice enough, shaking my hand enthusiastically and chatting about how excited he was to be in the neighborhood. "Just needed a fresh start, you know," he said with a shrug. "Between jobs at the moment, but I've got some promising leads. Thought a change of scenery might help." I nodded sympathetically. We've all been there, right? I offered to help him unload the truck, and he seemed genuinely grateful. As we carried boxes inside, I got my first glimpse of the interior. It was pretty sparse, just some basic furniture and not many personal belongings. But hey, maybe the guy was just traveling light for his fresh start. Over the next few weeks, Todd and I started hanging out more. He'd come over in the evenings sometimes, and we'd have a beer on the porch and chat about life. He was always asking questions about the neighborhood, the other residents, what everyone did for work. At the time, I thought he was just trying to get to know the area, but looking back, those questions take on a more sinister tone. One day, Todd noticed me struggling with a broken lawnmower in my garage. "Hey man, need a hand with that?" he called out. I gladly accepted the help, and Todd proved to be surprisingly handy. He tinkered with the mower for a bit and got it running again in no time. "Wow, thanks, Todd," I said. "I had no idea you were so good with tools." He just shrugged modestly. "Picked up a few things here and there. Say, you wouldn't happen to have a socket wrench set I could borrow sometime, would you? Been meaning to do some work on my car." "Sure thing," I replied without hesitation. "Mi casa es su casa. Feel free to borrow whatever you need from the garage." That was my first mistake. Over the next couple months, Todd borrowed various tools and items from me, a drill, some gardening equipment, even my pressure washer. He always returned them promptly and in good condition, so I never thought twice about it. He'd even started helping out other neighbors with odd jobs and repairs. Everyone thought he was such a nice, helpful guy. But then things started to get weird. I noticed some of my tools going missing, ones I hadn't lent to Todd. At first I chalked it up to my own forgetfulness. Maybe I'd misplaced them or lent them to someone else and forgotten. But as more items disappeared, a sinking feeling grew in my gut. I started paying closer attention, keeping mental inventory of my garage, and sure enough, things were vanishing. A pair of bolt cutters, my good drill bits, even some power tools. I didn't want to believe Todd was stealing from me, but the evidence was piling up. One evening, I decided to confront him about it. I knocked on his door, heart pounding, but there was no answer. I tried again the next day and the next. Todd seemed to have vanished. His car was gone from the driveway. Concerned, I called our landlord to see if Todd had mentioned going out of town. That's when I got the real shock. "Todd? I don't have any tenant by that name," the landlord said, sounding confused. My blood ran cold. "But he's been living next door for months," I stammered. "Son, that house has been empty since the last tenants moved out in February. No one's rented it since then." I felt like I was going to be sick. How was this possible? I'd seen Todd coming and going for months. We'd hung out, shared beers. He'd been in my home. In a daze, I called the police. They came out to investigate, and what they found chilled me to the bone. The house next door was indeed empty of furniture or any signs of habitation. But in the garage, they discovered a trove of stolen goods, tools, electronics, jewelry, and more. Items from houses all over the neighborhood. It turns out Todd had been squatting in the empty house, using it as a base of operations to rob the entire street. He'd befriended us all, gained our trust, learned our schedules and habits, and we'd fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. The police took statements from everyone and documented the stolen items. They promised to keep an eye out for Todd, but said it was likely he'd already skipped town. I felt violated, betrayed, and incredibly stupid. How could I have been so blind? The signs were all there, the sparse furnishings, the constant questions about neighbors, the convenient skills with tools. He'd played us all for fools. In the days that followed, I learned I wasn't the only one Todd had fooled. Other neighbors came forward with similar stories of missing items and broken trust. We'd all thought we were just being good neighbors, never suspecting we were opening our homes to a thief. The incident left me shaken and paranoid. I installed security cameras and a top-of-the-line alarm system. I became wary of new faces in the neighborhood. The sense of community we'd once had was fractured, replaced by suspicion and unease. It's been months now, and there's been no sign of Todd. Sometimes I still catch myself glancing at the house next door, half expecting to see him wave from the porch with that easy smile. But it remains empty, a reminder of how easily we can be deceived. I've tried to move on, to put the whole ordeal behind me. But late at night, when the house is quiet, I find myself replaying every interaction with Todd in my mind, wondering how I could have been so blind, so trusting, wondering if I'll ever feel truly safe in my own home again. The experience has changed me, made me more cautious and less open. I hate that Todd took that from me too, my ability to trust, to welcome new people into my life without suspicion. It's a loss that cuts deeper than any of the material items he stole. Sometimes I wonder where Todd is now, if he's pulled the same con in another unsuspecting neighborhood. I hope not. I hope karma catches up with him eventually, but mostly, I hope I never see his face again. So that's my story. A cautionary tale about the dangers of blind trust and the masks people wear. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you never truly know someone. Even the friendliest neighbor might be hiding dark secrets behind that cheerful facade. Be careful out there, folks, and maybe think twice before handing over your house keys to the new guy next door. I'm a freelance designer living in Portland. Well, I was living there until recently. I had this cozy little apartment in an older building downtown. You know, one of those charming brick places with character. I loved it at first. The high ceilings, the big windows, the central location. It felt like home. About 6 months into living there, I started noticing some weird noises coming from the vents. At first, I didn't think much of it. Old buildings make strange sounds, right? I figured it was probably just the pipes, or maybe even some mice scurrying around in there. I mentioned it to my landlord, but he just shrugged it off and said he'd look into it. As the weeks went on, the noises became more frequent. I'd hear scratching and shuffling sounds late at night when I was trying to sleep. Sometimes it sounded like faint whispers or muffled breathing. It was starting to freak me out, but I kept telling myself I was just being paranoid. One night, I was up late working on a big project. It was around 2 a.m., and the apartment was dead quiet, except for the tap-tap-tap of my keyboard. Suddenly, I heard a distinct cough coming from the vent near my desk. It wasn't a mouse or a pipe. It was unmistakably human. My blood ran cold. I sat there frozen, barely breathing, straining my ears. After a few minutes of silence, I heard it again. A soft cough, followed by what sounded like someone shifting their position. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed with fear. Eventually, I worked up the courage to slowly get up and back away from the vent. I grabbed my phone and keys and got the hell out of there. I spent the night at a 24-hour cafe, shaken and struggling to make sense of what I'd heard. The next day, I called my landlord and insisted he come check out the vents. He seemed annoyed but agreed to stop by that afternoon. When he arrived, I nervously explained what I'd been hearing. He looked at me like I was crazy, but humored me by examining the vents. At first, everything seemed normal, but then he noticed something strange about the vent cover in my bedroom. There were tiny holes drilled into it, so small you'd never notice unless you were looking closely. He unscrewed the cover, and we both gasped. The inside of the vent was lined with some kind of soundproofing material. and there were wires running through it. My landlord immediately called the police. When they arrived and investigated further, they found an elaborate system of cameras and microphones hidden throughout the vents in my apartment. They traced the wires to the apartment next door. It turns out my neighbor, a quiet guy I'd only seen in passing, had been spying on me for months. He'd drilled those tiny holes in the vent covers and set up this whole creepy surveillance system. The police found hundreds of hours of video and audio recordings of me in my apartment. I felt violated in a way I can't even describe. This person had been watching my most private moments, listening to my conversations, invading every aspect of my life. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything. The idea that someone had been secretly observing me was absolutely sickening. The police arrested my neighbor, and he's facing multiple charges now. But the damage was already done. I couldn't bear to stay in that apartment another night. I packed up my essential belongings and moved in with a friend while I figured out my next steps. It's been a few months now, and I'm still dealing with the fallout. I jump at every little sound. I'm constantly checking for hidden cameras or microphones, even in new places. I have nightmares about being watched. I can't bring myself to live in an apartment building anymore. The idea of shared walls and vents makes me break out in a cold sweat. I ended up moving to a small house on the outskirts of the city. It's not as convenient for work, but at least I feel safer here. I've had the place swept for bugs multiple times, and I've installed an extensive security system. Some might say I'm being paranoid, but after what I went through, I don't think you can be too careful. The hardest part is not knowing how long he was watching me before I noticed. Was it the whole time I lived there? Just a few weeks. The uncertainty eats away at me. I find myself replaying every moment, every conversation, wondering if he was listening. I'm in therapy now, trying to work through the trauma and anxiety. It's helping, slowly. But I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe or comfortable in my own space again. The invasion of privacy was so complete, so violating. Sometimes I catch myself staring at the vents in my new place, half expecting to hear those shuffling sounds again. I have to remind myself that I'm safe now, that it's over. But part of me wonders if it will ever really be over. Will I ever be able to relax in my own home again without constantly looking over my shoulder? I'm sharing this story as a warning to others. Pay attention to your surroundings. Trust your instincts if something feels off. And if you live in an old building with accessible vents, well, maybe consider getting them checked out. You never know who might be listening. I'm trying to move forward and reclaim my life, but it's a daily struggle. The experience has changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I'm more cautious, more suspicious. I value my privacy in a way I never did before, and I'll never take for granted the feeling of safety in my own home again. For now, I'm focusing on healing and rebuilding. I'm throwing myself into my work, spending time with supportive friends, and trying to create new, positive memories in my new space. It's a slow process, but I'm determined to not let this experience define me. Still, there are nights when the house settles and creaks, and I find myself holding my breath, listening intently for any sign that I'm not alone. In those moments, I'm right back in that apartment, frozen in fear as I realize someone is watching me through the vents. It's a feeling I don't know if I'll ever fully shake. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that you can never be too careful when it comes to your personal space and privacy. I hope my story serves as a wake-up call for others. Stay vigilant, trust your gut, and remember that sometimes the monsters aren't just in your imagination. They might be right next door, watching and waiting. I've been a professional dog groomer in Buffalo for over a decade now. It's always been more than just a job for me. I absolutely adore dogs. My German Shepherd, Max, has been my loyal companion for the past 8 years. He's such a good boy, always alert and protective. At least he used to be. It all started about 6 months ago. I began noticing some odd changes in Max's behavior, especially at night. He'd always been a bit of a night owl, often barking at the slightest noise outside. But suddenly, he became eerily quiet after dark. At first, I thought maybe he was just getting older and mellowing out, but something felt off. During the day, Max seemed fine, his usual energetic, playful self. But as soon as night fell, it was like a switch flipped. He'd become lethargic, barely reacting to sounds that would normally have him on high alert. His eyes looked glassy and unfocused. I started to worry that maybe he was sick, so I took him to the vet. They ran some tests but couldn't find anything wrong. The strange behavior continued for a couple of weeks. I was at a loss. Then one night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom. As I passed by Max's bed, I noticed he wasn't there. Panic set in immediately. Had he somehow gotten out? I rushed to check the back door, and that's when I saw him through the window. He was in the backyard, stumbling around like he was drunk. My heart was racing as I ran outside to check on him. As soon as I reached Max, I knew something was very wrong. His eyes were unfocused and he could barely stand up straight. It was like he'd been drugged. I scooped him up, no easy feat with a full-grown German Shepherd, and rushed him to the emergency vet. They ran some tests and confirmed my fears. Max had some kind of sedative in his system. I was horrified. How could this have happened? I racked my brain trying to think of any way he could have gotten into something at home, but I'm always so careful about keeping medications and chemicals locked away. The vet suggested maybe someone had thrown something over the fence, but that didn't sit right with me. Our fence is pretty high, and Max never ate food from strangers. After bringing Max home and making sure he was okay, I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was going on. On a hunch, I decided to check the footage from the security cameras I'd installed a few months back. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, on the grainy night vision footage, was a figure entering my backyard. It was an older man, probably in his 70s, moving with surprising stealth for his age. He approached Max, who was wagging his tail. Clearly, this wasn't a stranger to him. The man pulled something from his pocket. It looked like a piece of meat. He held it out to Max, who eagerly gobbled it up. Then the man quietly left the way he came. I felt sick to my stomach. Someone had been drugging my dog, and not just anyone. It had to be one of my neighbors, someone Max knew and trusted. I rewound the footage and saw that this had been happening almost every night for the past few weeks. I didn't sleep at all that night. I was torn between fury and fear. Who would do this, and why? I spent hours poring over the footage, trying to get a clear shot of the man's face. It was hard to make out details in the dark, but I was pretty sure it was Mr. Johnson, the elderly man who lived 2 doors down. He'd always seemed harmless enough, often stopping to pet Max when we were out for walks. The thought that he could be behind this made me feel betrayed and violated. The next day, I was a mess. I called in sick to work. There was no way I could focus on grooming dogs when my own was in danger. I spent the morning trying to figure out what to do. Should I confront Mr. Johnson? Call the police? I was afraid that without hard evidence, they might not take me seriously. Around noon, I saw Mr. Johnson out in his front yard, tending to his flower beds like nothing was wrong. Something in me snapped. Before I knew it, I was marching over to him, shaking with anger. "Mr. Johnson," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk." He looked up, seeming surprised. "Oh, hello, dear. Is everything all right?" I cut right to the chase. "I know what you've been doing to Max. I have it on camera. Why are you drugging my dog?" The color drained from his face. For a moment he just stared at me, mouth agape. Then he stuttered, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," I snapped. "I saw you on the security footage. Every night, sneaking into my yard, feeding Max something. He's been acting strange for weeks. The vet found sedatives in his system. What are you doing to him?" Mr. Johnson's demeanor changed instantly. The kindly old man act dropped away, replaced by something cold and hard. "You should mind your own business, young lady," he growled. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." His sudden shift scared me more than anything else. I took a step back, fumbling for my phone. "I'm calling the police," I said, my voice shaking. He laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "Go ahead. They won't find anything, and you'll regret sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." With that, he turned and went into his house, slamming the door behind him. I stood there for a moment, stunned. Then I ran back home and locked all the doors. I did call the police, but just as Mr. Johnson predicted, they didn't find anything. They took my statement and looked at the security footage, but said there wasn't enough evidence to prove he'd actually drugged Max. They said they'd keep an eye on the situation, but I could tell they weren't taking it very seriously. The next few weeks were a nightmare. I was constantly on edge, jumping at every sound. I kept Max inside as much as possible, only taking him out on a leash for quick bathroom breaks. I installed more security cameras and motion sensor lights all around the house. Mr. Johnson seemed to have vanished. His curtains were always drawn, and I never saw him leave the house. Part of me was relieved, but mostly it just added to my anxiety. What was he planning? Then, as suddenly as it had all started, it was over. About 3 weeks after our confrontation, a moving truck showed up at Mr. Johnson's house. I watched from behind my curtains as his belongings were loaded up. He came out only once to get into a waiting taxi. As he did, he looked directly at my window and smiled, a cold, knowing smile that sent chills down my spine. Just like that, he was gone. I never saw him again. It's been months now, and I still don't know what to make of it all. Why was he drugging Max? What was he trying to accomplish? These questions keep me up at night. I've become almost paranoid, constantly checking and rechecking my security system. Max has fully recovered, thankfully. He's back to his old self, alert and protective. But sometimes, late at night, I still catch him staring out the window, as if he's waiting for something, or someone. I don't think I'll ever feel completely safe in my home again. The idea that someone could violate our privacy and hurt my beloved pet so easily, it's shaken me to my core. I find myself wondering about the new family that moved into Mr. Johnson's old house. Are they what they seem, or do they have secrets too? I know this story sounds crazy. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all. But then I look at the security footage, still saved on my computer, and I know it really happened. I just wish I knew why. I guess some mysteries are never meant to be solved, but I'll never stop looking over my shoulder, always on guard, ready to protect Max from whatever might come for him in the night.